Welcome to the launch of Volume 34 of the Caribbean Writer, the University of the Virgin Islands International Literary Journal, where the Caribbean imagination embraces the world. This two-day launch is also a very special nod to the Virgin Islands Literary Festival and Book Fair, which was postponed in April because of COVID-19. Therefore, we have included award-winning authors to present mini writing workshops on poetry, fiction, memoir writing, and a children's half hour, all sprinkled among the Caribbean Writer readings. So it's a little different than the regular launch, but it's sort of a hybrid, we like to call it. My name is Alscess Lewis Brown, and I'm the editor of the Caribbean Writer and also program chair of the VI Lit Fest. This event would not have been possible without core team members such as Charlene Spencer Johnson, the administrative specialist at the Caribbean Writer, unable to join us today. She will be here tomorrow and she sends her warm regards. And also, I'd like to shout out to Matthias Clavier, who is Assistant Director of Communication, Technology and Distance Learning in UVI School of Agriculture. He's our technology person at the VI Lit Fest and the technology person also just about everywhere on UVI campus, just about. And of course, Adrian Rajasa, who is signing in with us from Minnesota, who is our technology consultant. Diane Levans from the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences is the treasurer for the VI Lit Fest and also the administrative specialist in that school. And Yvette McMahon is our secretary, and she is also an educator within the Department of Education. We also have some stalwarts that we can't ignore. We have Dr. Simon Jones Hendrickson is not able to join us today. He's still recuperating, but he sends his regard. He's our president, and I'm the vice president. Ellie Hirsch is the Children's Museum of St. Croix representative. Biko McMillan is signing in from New York, and he has always been available to help us wherever we've asked him to. And there is Carol Henneman on St. Thomas and Elaine Jacobs, who have also been helping us along with this affair. So we want to thank all of those persons who have come together to help us to make this event what it is today. We want to also take a moment to acknowledge the sponsors for today's events. The sponsors include the St. Croix Foundation, the Virgin Islands Lottery, the Virgin Islands Department of Tourism, and the St. Croix Avis. And by the way, they have upgraded their price from $400 to $600 per year. So that is a regional prize. We're looking forward to awarding that to a deserving person. We are joining other festivals and publishing organizations across the diaspora and within the region who have also embraced the use of a virtual modality to reach across literary miles to engage our people's intellect and imagination. Congratulations to Lassana Sekou at House of Nihisi in St. Martin for his introduction of a Caribbean Literature Day on July 12th. Also, happy belated birthday to one of the region's literary giants and a founding board member for the Caribbean Writer, Mr. Earl Lovelace. Today's participants come from across the diaspora. As you know, we just introduced ourselves in the preliminary session, but we have people also who are coming in from Australia, Norway, the wider Caribbean, the UK. We have Dominica and the UK in the house. We have St. Lucia, and we have just about a number of states represented here. And of course, the British Virgin Islands, the closest island we have besides Anguilla and I believe we have St. Martin. And of course, we have our Virgin Islander who lives in Switzerland. And she has joined us. And welcome, Ms. Mark. She's been writing for the Caribbean Writer for at least 30 years. Each journal is published under a theme. The theme for Volume 34 is Dignity, Power, and Place in the Caribbean Space. However, I'd like to make a little explanation here. The theme for this event is actually the theme for our upcoming Volume 35, scheduled to be published in 2021. The theme is Diasporic Rhythms, Interrogating the Past, Reimagining the Future. We felt it was appropriate to incorporate this theme because of the way the world has suddenly shifted following the pandemic, the Black Lives Matter movement, the murder of George Floyd, and the ongoing interrogation of our own histories, our relationships, our institutions, our monuments, our geographical connections, and as we are forced onto a path where we must envision opportunities that come with our new realities. As the world continues to change, we must reimagine what our future should be or will be. And this is what we do in the stories that we write and tell, the poems we write, the essays we write, and the books we read. So our featured speakers are exemplars of how the dynamics of social commentary, history, scholarship, culture, and the imagination can be used to nurture our literary sense, our literary and intellectual sense, that is. If we lose the intellectual life of our communities, we'll lose an important part of who we are as human beings. Because the Caribbean Writer recognizes this, over the past 34 years, the Caribbean Writer has awarded over $200,000 worth of prizes to new and emerging writers across the diaspora. So also under diasporic rhythms, interrogating the past and imagining the future, we're currently accepting submissions for volume 35, also dedicated to Edward Kamau Brathwaite, one of our founding board members who passed away earlier this year. And at this time, I'd like to have our provost, Dr. McKay, who will bring greetings on behalf of President David Hall.
Hello, I'm Camille McKay, Provost and Vice President of the University of the Virgin Islands. And I want to welcome you not just on behalf of myself, but also on behalf of President Hall, who was unable to bring you remarks today. Welcome to the Caribbean Writers event. Diasporic Rhythms, Interrogating the Past, Reimagining the Future. As I reflect on this year's theme in the midst of the double pandemic that we are facing, COVID-19, and pulling the mask off the racism that has so shaped the Black and Brown experiences in this country, there are many thoughts that occur to me. First, that your theme is timely. Interrogating the past. This is reflected in our questioning of those symbols of our nation. We celebrate that which we admire. Thus, what do our symbols tell us about our nation and what we admire? How can we understand today's issues if we do not admit that we could not be here without the past? If we are unable to understand the past, then we will not be able to chart our future, a future that is based on honesty and mutual respect. And what future can we imagine? When we question, what if? Then we, in fact, reimagine the future. What if? Our times also dictate that we leave our imaginations open for the unimaginable. Who would have thought that we would be doing everything virtual in 2020? We have to imagine, reimagine, and be willing to let go of any assumptions that we have. And so I want to congratulate the Caribbean Writer and commend Alscess Lewis Brown for reimagining 2020, for being open to new things and for honoring the past. I am pleased to see so many returning authors who will remind us of LitFest's past while bridging the path to LitFests of the future. I'm delighted to see the speaker lineup and know that attendees are in for a treat. Diasporic rhythms. Be fed, be challenged, be soothed. I hope that these rhythms provide what you are needing at this time. I wish you the very best for this webinar. Enjoy.
And this time I'd like to ask the Department of Tourism representative who will speak on behalf of Commissioner Joe Bushelty, bring us greetings for a few minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Alani Henneman, Assistant Commissioner at the Department of Tourism. On behalf of Commissioner Joseph Bushelta, I'd like to welcome everyone to this wonderful event. The Caribbean Writer is one of the cultural, iconic events that the department sponsors year to year, and we look forward to engaging them. You know, as we speak of the times and the place that we're in this incredible time when a global pandemic has changed the way we live and who we are as a people, it is the strength and the resiliency of the people of the Caribbean that just keep moving us forward, that keep pushing the boundaries to make us a stronger people. And so when we look at this event and we look at all the different authors and all of the the great minds that are here, we have to extend a thank you for the Caribbean writer that despite the place we're in, they have pushed forward and moved the boundaries to now let the internet connect us. Who would have thought, 10 years ago that the internet would be the new now and that meetings place to place and face to face would not exist, and as we continue to push forward in this space, we have to have our past give way to present. And even within our COVID-19 pandemic, you see where we are now going back to old-time remedies to strengthen ourselves to deal in the time and space where you rely on the old-time Buckleys and your grandparents' remedies for colds and coughs and different things. These are the cultural things that make us unique as a people and that make us stand out, each island, each territory. And so as from the tourism perspective, these are the things that we continue to market and push about how innovative and creative our people are. And as our innovative minds continue to transform our culture through various mediums and humanity despite the changes that we face in this world outside of the pandemic, we are thankful for the Caribbean writer to keep the Caribbean top of mind as well as the US Virgin Islands. So I would just like to thank everyone that's on this forum, for taking their Saturday to come out and share all of this, cultural ambiance of just greatness. And just to say, keep doing great work. And we look forward to partnering with you next year. Have a great time, everyone. And I'll be here enjoying the presentations.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Mrs. Henneman Todman. And Deanna James is our next speaker who will speak for a few minutes from St. Croix Foundation. St. Croix Foundation is like our backbone, and they have always been always ready to hear all of my woes sometimes about what we need. And I have to tell you that I've never walked away empty-handed. And so I know that we're in difficult times now, but I hope that that remains a constant.
Good afternoon. I was going to say good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. To all the invited guests, our guest authors and participants, on behalf of the board and staff of St. Croix Foundation, thank you for joining us today. To Alscess and your small but dedicated team, thank you for your perseverance and passion. VI Lit Fest, the umbrella project for today's event, represents so much of what St. Croix Foundation's founders valued and held sacred when they launched our organization almost 30 years ago. In the wake of Hurricane Hugo, when so much of our island's physical infrastructure was decimated, they were convicted in their commitment to supporting smaller nonprofits as a crucial component of St. Croix's recovery. Today, our fiscal sponsorship services represent one of the most distinctive characteristics of the foundation. Through the prioritization of civil society and social impact organizations, St. Croix Foundation has been afforded exponential reach in our community, serving as a preeminent fiscal sponsor in the Virgin Islands for over 250 nonprofits and community-based projects over the past 30 years. Our sponsored projects, like VI Lit Fest, represent truly holistic and mutually beneficial partnerships, allowing us to plant our roots deep in the earth in linkage with our local nonprofits and enabling us to spend most of our days with our fingers on the pulse of our community. This partnership also enables small projects to build the capacity they need to grow and to grow strong. But the VI Lit Fest is a particularly special project to me on a very personal note. As a student of the arts, I am innately aware of the power of storytelling. In addition to having danced ballet for over 15 years in my early life, I was most profoundly impacted by the literary arts. I was also blessed with a mother who was an avid reader and who instilled in me a love of literature. I still have on my bookshelf my very first Read Just for Fun book, my all-time favorite childhood story about a bird, which shaped me in profound ways at the tender age of 18. Jonathan Livingston Seagull taught me to be a reader. He taught me to be a dreamer, and most of all, allowed me to be an unapologetic nonconformist. My entire constitution was molded and fixed because of a deep bond I made with a seagull. I went on to major in English literature in college and fought my advisors hard to ensure that my curriculum was well-rounded, insisting that surely old white men weren't the only authors of the English language literature. In the last semester of my sophomore year, I was finally placed in a course I still remember well today, Literary World of People of Color, where I was first introduced to the likes of Jamaica Kincaid and Chinua Achebe. That class, once again, had such an impact on my life and my consciousness that I still have every single book and anthology that I read that one semester on my bookshelves decades later. I believe that everything in my soul teaches me that storytelling holds increasingly untapped power in communities like ours, power that has the potential to heal and to advance societies. That belief was affirmed last year at a philanthropic convening in Kingston, my first trip to Jamaica, where I participated in a roundtable discussion at Strawberry Hill and listened to a presentation made by a new colleague from the Lasco Chin Corporate Foundation, who provided data points that identified the Caribbean Basin as the single most murderous region on the planet. That discussion would become the conception of a newly formed Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance. But on that day in Jamaica, that data point was shocking to my consciousness, and I spent some quiet time sitting with it and reflecting on the millions of dollars of investments the Croix Foundation has made around niche programs, around public safety, around economic development, and education reform. And I had one of the most profound epiphanies I've had in my 17 years in philanthropy. I deduced that all of the investments we've made collectively in our well-intended field of philanthropy have not put a dent in this increasingly urgent crisis around violence. I know that our children are not born violent, and I know that our culture does not celebrate violence. The message that jumped out to me was in the form of an African proverb, which I actually recently learned is not an African proverb, but that a child that is not embraced by a village will burn it down to feel its warmth. That data point also led me to the conclusion that the challenges we are facing as a community and as a country are not, in fact, rooted in too little storytelling. As a people, we have actually recorded a lot of our story. The challenge is around insufficient social excavation and interrogation of those stories, around our collective failure to power those stories in order to elevate our people. Ultimately, we have not yet effectively and intentionally led our children to bear Jonathan Livingston Seagull. That's a huge part of the work ahead. That's a challenge for all of us, to activate our rich, full literary reservoirs, to educate, to heal, and to advance. On behalf of all of us at St. Croix Foundation, I thank you, Alscess, for doing your part. St. Croix Foundation remains steadfast in our commitment to doing ours.
Thank you very much. And at this time, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge our board members, Dr. Patricia Harkins-Pierre, Vincent Cooper, LaMarche Rupe-Marine. Those are part of the editorial board for volume 34. For volume 35, we welcome new board members from St. Lucia, author, poet John Robert Lee, and Professor Valerie Kumbi. And so today I know that Mr. Lee is with us. I saw his name come up a little while ago, and Dr. Harkins-Pierre and Rupe-Marine are also here. And we wanted, I know some message was sent, and Adrian is going to be sprinkling that through the entire 2 days. We're going to have moments when we'll pull those video pieces in. So at this time, we'd like to, Dion Phillips, introduce Dr. Liverpool.
The protocol already established and recognized. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dion Phillips, a retired professor of sociology at the University of Virgin Islands, and I speak to you from St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands. It is my distinct pleasure and privilege to introduce our featured speaker today on the occasion of the launching of the 34th volume of the Caribbean Writer. And I do so on behalf of the Caribbean Writer and the University of the Virgin Islands, together with the friends and the well-wishers and supporters of the Caribbean Writer. It is my understanding that the Caribbean Writer an organ of the University of the Virgin Islands, is now in its 34th year of publication, commendable indeed. In respect of our keynote speaker here today, it would be quite unnecessary for me to regale you with all the details of the accolades with which he's associated. And Dr. Liverpool is a modest man. I know him to be a modest man and does not fancy or heaping him with praise. That being said, it would be remiss of me if I did not tell you that we are fortunate to have as our speaker one of the world's greatest calypsonians, a Kaiso man who has won the monarch title on 9 different times, surpassing the record that was held by the mighty Sparrow. But our speaker is not a mere calypsonian. He is, in his own right, a multifaceted and multi-talented figure, and I and others of us at the university have had the good pleasure of knowing him as a colleague during his stint at the University of the Virgin Islands, where he left us behind a sterling record as a teacher. We miss him dearly. To the best of my knowledge, our speaker is currently a resident professor at the University of Trinidad and Tobago in his native land. But Dr. Liverpool is not a mere calypsonian and teacher or professor. He has also blazed the trail as an author, having published a number of books, including Rituals of Power and Rebellion in Trinidad and Tobago in the year 2001. In all of this, what is overarching and the true measure of the man is his role as a tireless advocate of Caribbean culture, the arts, the social sciences, and their role in Caribbean identity formation. And so as participants at this year's journal launching, we eagerly await Dr. Liverpool's adumbration and unraveling of some of the aspects of the diasporic rhythms as we together interrogate the past and re-image the future in his own inimitable style. We can expect that Dr. Liverpool's thought-provoking and erudite presentation will invoke introspection, as has the Black Lives Matter movement so aptly done around the world, and that he will likely solicit our participation as exponents and exemplars in the ethos of the 21st century nationhood, a reimaging of Caribbean identity. And so without any further ado, please join me in welcoming an outstanding calypsonian, an outstanding teacher, and author, the one and only Dr. Hollis Chalkdust Liverpool. I give you Dr. Liverpool.
Well, thank you very, very, very much, Dr. Phillips. Thank you very much, Mr. Alscess Brown, for inviting me. Dr. Phillips, whenever I hear the voice of Dr. Phillips, I miss St. Thomas so much. It's a real pleasure to be here this afternoon and to be taking part in this Caribbean Writer Series. Thank you very much for inviting me. As I used to always tell people in St. Thomas that while I love to sing, sometimes I prefer to talk, because in the Caribbean, there is so much to talk about, and sometimes we don't talk enough. So it's a pleasure to be here and to speak on this topic, interrogating the past and reimagining the future. And I'm happy that you have accepted my theme, which is my book, a new book which I've just written, and it's going to be published next month. And the title of the book, it's called God, the Press, and Uriah Butler. God, the Press, and Uriah Butler. And you might want to find out, why would I name a book God, the Press, and Uriah Butler? In fact, when I tell people the name of the book is God, some people jump already. They say, why God? And this book is about in the 1930s in Trinidad and Tobago, and to some extent in the Caribbean, where in the 1930s we had riots throughout the Caribbean. St. Kitts, Barbados, Suriname, in fact, was the first. Suriname, Jamaica, so many riots in the Caribbean that Britain had to send the Moyne Commission led by Mr. Moyne, and the Foster Commission to look at Trinidad and Tobago and see why, and the Moyne Commission to look at the Caribbean to see why are all these riots taking place. And in Trinidad and Tobago, this big national riot took place on the 19th of June, 1937. And this is what I'm writing about. I'm writing about a man called Shubal Uriah Buzz Butler, who came from Grenada and called for a national strike on the 19th of June, 1937. Why am I writing about him? Why God? Because when I happened to meet Butler as a young man, and I said, "Good afternoon, Mr. Butler," he addressed me, Dr. Phillips, he addressed me as this. He said, "My name is not Butler. My name is Gordon Butler." In other words, whatever I'm doing, it's God and myself doing it. Just God and Butler. And therefore, he feared no man. He didn't fear the British colonial system, because he was saying that you have to fight not just Butler, but you have to fight God and Uriah Butler. So the title of the book is God, the Press, and Uriah Butler. Why the press? Because the press at that time represented the colonial system. The press, the Guardian, the Port of Spain Gazette, one called the People, and the Calypsonians. I use the Calypsonians, I'll tell you why just now, but the newspapers used the press, and they had an idea of Butler, what Butler did, etc. Butler was charged, and that strike caused 25 persons to be killed, approximately 25 persons to be killed, hundreds more were injured, and thousands of dollars lost in burning sugarcane plantations and destroying oil fields. So the name of the book is God the Press, and I used those newspapers, but I also used the People's newspaper, and the People's newspaper were the Calypsonians, were Lion and Tiger and Growler and Beginner. They used their calypsos to look at what the people are thinking, what they were saying about Butler. So that how did they approach colonialism, the judiciary, the Privy Council, etc.? And how did they fight the conquering system with all their warships and their soldiers? Now, when I went back to see Butler again, Butler told me that history must start with Butler. I thought he was a very arrogant man at the time. But then when I began to study at the University of the West Indies, I came into contact with what we call the concentric method of history by Jerome Bruner. And what he was saying is that you can start to teach children and students history, especially Caribbean history, from anywhere. You can start anywhere, but you must make a circle and come back to where you started. Now, today we ask ourselves, who was this man? Who elected him leader? What did he do? Why did he call a national strike? Hence the book. And just like a dissertation, I looked for my research questions or my research statements, some right hypotheses. And my research question was, the British and the colonial system saw Butler as an uneducated man. They saw him as a violent man. They saw him as a radical. They used the word megalomaniac. They called him a fanatic. And worse, he was black. Black in the time when white was a privilege, when a white skin was a privilege, and when a white skin was a passport to power, to wealth, and privilege. So that they didn't see Butler as a human being. He was not educated for them, and he is black. How did I go about it? My method of researching him, I use what we call the top-down approach and the bottom-up approach. Bottom-up, I use three approaches. I use the top-down, where I look at all the so-called aristocrats and all the newspapers, etc. I use the bottom-up approach, where I went and I interviewed all the people who lived, some of the people who are still alive, thank God, and all the people who were there. And then I look at peripheral areas, and I put all three of them together, and I combine it to get this story. And I wrote it that like Mrs. Deanna James was talking about just now, in a storytelling style, so that children can read it and understand it. And what did I find? My findings? In my book, we'll see that Butler was a totally innocent man. That his speeches, his mobilization of workers, his hunger marches, which he organized, his organization of the masses of Africans and Indians. Butler was the first to bring Africans and Indians together in Trinidad and Tobago, probably in the whole Caribbean. And they were all meant to improve the lot of the working class. And in fact, the working class was suffering to the extent that even after the strike, they decided to give them a pay rise. And would you believe the pay rise in Trinidad after the national strike in 1937 was a penny a day, a penny an hour per day, 2 cents. And Butler was jailed and given 2 years and charged for sedition. And after he was jailed and suffered 2 years in prison, and he came the World War. The World War of 1939, World War II, 1939 to 1945, the British felt that Butler could not be free. A man like him could not be free. And so therefore, they jailed him again. Having committed no crime, he was held again from 1939 to 1945 on an island in Trinidad, northeast of Trinidad. So Butler spent 8 years of his life, 8 years of his life, jailed simply for saying that Black Lives Matter. And when we talk today about Black Lives Matter, the first man in the Caribbean, perhaps the whole entire Caribbean, to cause a riot and strike is Butler in terms of saying that Black Lives Matter. So the aim of his life, the aim of the book is to show everything about what Butler did. In fact, to show you Butler called himself the chief servant. So I'm happy to bring this book, and I'm going to sign it up and send it to the Virgin Islands, to the whole Caribbean. All I want to get the addresses, and I want to sign it up so that you can understand, and our children can understand what took place in 1987 and all these strikes in the Caribbean, especially in Trinidad and Tobago, with Turnbull Butler, a Canadian who was very, very, very much educated, more educated than many college people, even though he didn't have any certificate from the University of the West Indies. And that brings me to the importance of history, because some people ask me, well, why Butler? So I write about Butler and I write about history because it is always said that if you forget the past, and we used to talk about that in the Virgin Islands a lot, when we forget the past, then we surrender the future. I like to tell students and tell people again that you drive a motor car, and while you drive a motor car, and while you are going forward with that motor car, you always keep looking in the mirror. You're driving forward, but you're looking backwards. And that look backwards is like history. We always look at the mirror. To understand where we're going, we look at the past. And it's not just to understand facts or what would be considered bunk. You know, Henry Ford said it's just like bunk. But even though while he said it was just like bunk, or to him it's bunk, Henry Ford used the bunk to improve the cars around him. So that we learn from the past. And what I'd like to stress with this writer series here, I'd like to stress not only just history, but to stress that meaning in history is always subjective. It is always subjective. Even though it may be diverse, it is always subjective. And therefore, meaning in history must always be revisited. In other words, it must be revisited to understand the meaning of it. So like in the Virgin Islands, we have to revisit Cyril King and all the persons who have contributed to the history of the Virgin Islands and in the Caribbean. Meaning and the significance of the past are constantly changing. I better repeat that. Meaning of history and the significance of the past are constantly changing. They are cumulative and they are progressive. And so we have to use all our methods, all our resources to bring back that meaning for our students. Students must reconstruct and they must posit their past in the proper historical context. And so we have to write. We who are academics and we who have done research have to do more research and we have to write. So it's a pleasure talking to you this afternoon. I hope I have my 15 minutes about the past, and I'm hoping that this book, God, the Press, and Uriah Butler is going to bring back some meaning for us in the Caribbean and especially in the Virgin Islands and in Trinidad and Tobago, and to show you what these persons, how these persons fought, and how these persons fought the British colonial system. I close with Dr. Phillips with a quote from Butler when he went into Parliament, into the Assembly, And he addressed the speaker. And when he was asked, why is he fighting Britain? Why is he fighting colonialism like that? His quote was, "I remain, Mr. Speaker, a most uncompromising enemy of British colonialism." Thank you, and thank you very much.
At this time, I'd like to take 3 or 4 minutes to ask a few questions, have people ask questions. Is there anyone who would like to ask Dr. Phillips, I'm sorry, Dr. Liverpool a few questions?
Sure.
If I may be recognized, Alscess?
Yes, you may.
Good afternoon, Dr. Liverpool. This is Carol Henneman. I enjoyed so much working with you at UVI. You are indeed a Caribbean gem.
Yeah.
And I always regret that I don't see you for Carnival anymore. You have to correct that. You're going to have a virtual Carnival for us.
Definitely. Just call me. Well, Blakey has died, and Blakey was my man who used to invite me, but I'm open to St. Thomas is my second home. St. Thomas is to a large extent my first home. Always the fourth center.
I have a question for you.
Sure, man. Sure.
Your work is so timely and so meaningful at this juncture in our history. I want you to reflect for me on what this could mean to the Virgin Islands, because we are now in a pivotal place where our children know less about us than they ever knew before. And so when you talk about resurrecting our history and bringing it forward to have meaning, what do we do to get the sepulchre out of our brain so that we can rediscover who we are as a people?
Thanks a lot. I saw you starting just now when Ms. Deanna Jim was writing. She wrote that she was saying that most of us in the Caribbean think that writing comes from white people, and that our African people didn't write. And our African people have done so much, so that we have to bring stories like this and history like this to show the students in the Virgin Islands what these people have paved the way for us. For example, Butler was motivated to a large extent by Marcus Garvey. Butler read the works of Marcus Garvey. And by reading the works of Marcus Garvey, even though he didn't go to college, but that ignited the flame in him. So we have to see in the Virgin Islands that we are one Caribbean. And I used to stress that in my calypsos when I was in the when I sang there, that we have to make Virgin Islanders know that what is happening in Trinidad affects the Virgin Islands, and what happened in the Virgin Islands affects Trinidad, and that all of us come there and we only reach there by a different boat. And so the boat that reached in St. Thomas, another boat took some to Antigua, another took some to Dominica, etc. And it's only by a boat we are different. We are all linked by that trip from across from Africa to the Caribbean. And I used to stress that it's
okay.
Mama King took a different boat.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Liverpool.
Pleasure.
Kula, maybe one more question?
I have a question.
Okay. Who's that? Who wants to speak? Who is that?
Tim.
Oh, Tim, okay.
Thank you. And Chagdas, one of my long-time favorites. And I saw you at UVI when I was attending many years ago. Now, my question is kind of similar, but it's kind of different too. Who do we write to anymore? Because I have children and I don't think they read, at least they don't read books. So I want to write, and there are stories, and I agree with you, the stories have to be told. How do we get the children to read?
But I had that problem also, because when I went to publishers, especially outside, nobody publishing my books. I went to the UE. UE used to have a press at one time, and the headquarters is in Jamaica now. And I found out for a long time that many people, those press people who are press, they don't write. And when you go out in the States, they don't know about the person, they don't know the Caribbean, so they don't have that vim to publish a book. So I took upon myself, Dr. Phillips will tell you, for the last 20 years, I've been publishing my books for myself. How do I do it? I don't ask anybody for any help. I just tell them, I tell all the firms and all the companies, this is my trick I use. I said, don't give me any money. I don't want any help from you. Buy 2 books. Buy 5 books. You're a bigger company, buy 5. A small company, buy 2 books. Buy 2 books to whom? For your employees and for your employees' children. And I embarrass them. And by doing so, I'm getting all the companies and trying to be good. All the companies we have bypassed, take 2 books for your employees. So I use the employees. If you ask the employee to give them $20, don't give $20, but they'll buy 2 books. So I use them because we don't have publishers in the Caribbean. You have except the UWI and the public company.
How do you get the children to read? The children don't buy textbooks anymore. My children laugh at me when I tell them I buy textbooks. They laugh at me. They say, no, I don't buy textbooks anymore.
Yeah, because of that's why you need teachers, eh? And you don't need just teachers in classroom. You need a different kind of teacher. You need teachers to motivate children and to give them stories. You need teachers to show them how that touching the internet doesn't provide all the answers. And teachers have to make children read by using the books, etc., as part of their courses and their evaluation, when your evaluation exercises. How can you reach at that level to write the introduction for your dissertation if you don't read? That's why they have a part called literature review. So unless they read, they can't do doctorates, they can't do master's courses, and they can't write no thesis. So you need teachers. Teachers have to show our children, our students, that the internet and all these things they are part of it, but it's only when you read, and the more you read, the more you understand. Reading. I tell people, don't read not to make fun of me, but read to understand. Reading is a most important part of a child's career. You must read. He or she must read. So teachers is the answer.
We have time for one more question, and then we'll move to the next segment.
Yes, this is Lamar. Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Hi, Chuck. This is Lamar Sukarine, former colleagues at UVI.
Yeah.
You really presented an amazing presentation. I was very moved by it. Congratulations on a new book. I have a question concerning O'Reilly Butler's life. You mentioned something about him being in prison, and I think you're alluding to that. I think that was a main part of his life in terms of being generating revolutionary thoughts. In some ways, I don't want to paint him a Parliament Mandela because both histories are unique.
Yeah.
Were there any things that you come across that strikes you that had shaped Butler's life while he was in prison? Were there any moving moments of him that really give him this urge, you think, that to be who he turned out to be?
Good, and I'm glad you asked, and that's why I wrote, because to the British and to many academics, Butler was a violent man. Butler preached revolution, and that's how he has gone on in history. But Butler, on the other hand, was a spiritual Baptist, and there are many pictures of Butler with his Bible, and he began no meetings unless he sang a hymn. He did nothing unless in fact, while in court, while the British were trying to jail him, people heard him saying the words, Emmanuel, Emmanuel, Emmanuel. And when you look at the meaning of what Emmanuel meant, God is with us. God is with us. God is with us. Butler was a very holy, sacred man. And Butler was one of the stars of the spiritual Baptists that are now in St. Vincent, Dominica, all through the Caribbean, Jamaica, etc. A lot of spiritual Baptists. And Butler was one of the stars of that. The Americans in Trinidad, Butler was a part of that spreading of spiritual baptism. So I'm trying to make people understand that while the British paint him as a violent man who was killing people or causing, on the other hand, Butler was a Baptist who said that Jesus Christ is the chairman of my movement. Jesus Christ is the chairman of my movement, and I am the chief servant. I am the chief servant of Jesus Christ. So for many priests, Catholic priests, don't even see Butler as a Christian. And I'm trying in the book to show people that Butler was a Christian. And And secondly, Butler preached not to Africans alone. Butler called strike of Indians. Butler was the first man to unite Africans and Indians. And Butler was the first man in Trinidad and Tobago, and indeed perhaps in the entire Caribbean, that started Emancipation Day. So I'm trying for the people to see, how do we get that and how do we get that? Children have to read, teachers have to read. And if the book doesn't reach the teachers, it can't reach the children. If the thought and content don't reach the teachers, it can't reach the children, Dr. Ruth Narayan. So we have to have teachers who must be interested and then pass on that culture to our students.
Well said.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that very inspiring presentation, Dr. Liverpool. Thank you for accepting my invitation. You really have made our afternoon. Our next piece up is the speculative fiction workshop, which will have Cadwell, Turnbull, and Tobias Buckell. Cadwell and Tobias are, you ready, gentlemen?
Yes.
Cadwell and Tobias are both Virgin Islanders. Cadwell went to, correct me if I'm wrong, Cadwell, to Charlotte Amalia High School, graduated from Charlotte Amalia High School.
That's right.
And went on to publish nationally. He's become he's ended up, some of his work has ended up in the New York Times best-selling list. And Cadwell Turnbull's, I'm sorry, my throat. Tobias Buckell has also been on the New York Times best-selling list. And it amazes me that both Cadwell and Tiffany Yannick were in the same high school class at All Saints, and they both became national best-selling authors. And I always wonder about what it is that makes, I asked Cadwell, I know I've always asked Cadwell that, what is it, how did you become so immersed in writing so that you get to the point where you are sought after on a national level? And so these are two young men that we're extremely proud of in the Virgin Islands, and we'd like to give them an opportunity to give us a few words on speculative fiction, or sci-fi as some of the young folks would like to call it. So that's their genre.
Alscess, it says there's going to be a video. Are we waiting for that? Or are we launching right in?
I don't believe it was sent. It was supposed to have been sent, but I think that the person who was supposed to send it had a technical issue. So we'll just go forward with that. They were just supposed to have been introducing you, and I just did.
All right. Cadwell, it is always a pleasure to talk to you, man.
Yes, absolutely.
I was really excited when I found out that Tiffany was working in the Fantastic, and she was publishing all over the world. And when you came along, I was doubly excited because three writers of working with the fantastic tradition, fabulous tradition, fantasy, all from the Virgin Islands, all from roughly the same generation. It definitely seemed amazing that just three writers, doing what we're doing would all come from the same island, let alone the same region. I just want to say, for those who don't know much about Cadwell's work, his novel, The Lesson, came out recently. It's been optioned by, I think, AMC TV, right, Cadwell?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, optioned by AMC TV, the same people who do The Walking Dead and all that good stuff. It's a fantastic and very engaging book that uses some of the great imagery of science fiction, but is also set right here in the Virgin Islands. In fact, when I started to read your book, I said, dang it, you used that imagery of the Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End, of the spaceships landing in the Virgin Islands and everyone wondering why the Virgin Islands, which was something I had in my back pocket to try one day. But
damn.
You did a fantastic job. It's not a surprise we'd be both interested in going there. What got you into doing science fiction in St. Thomas? How did you come to discover, as we're all talking about here, these stories and want to do that yourself?
Right. Before I answer that, I just want to thank Alscess for inviting me to this, and also wanted to mention that me and Tobias are both in this fantastic new collection of anthologies about dystopia, one set before, during, and then after. And we've been in collections before. We were in the Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy 2018 together, and your story was so fantastic, Tobias. I just want to say, I haven't gotten to your story in the dystopia yet, but I'm looking forward to it. So to answer your question, I think I started just because I was a nerd, and I watched science fiction movies growing up. My mom, you know, so gratefully, she was also very into science fiction, and we watched a lot of like Star Trek movies together. And I was really into Stargate, SG-1 when I was a kid. But also going to high school, Charlotte Amalie High, they gave us science fiction to read. It was the classics. It was like 1984 and Brave New World and those kinds of novels. But I found those novels the most engaging because they got me thinking about how the world worked. I mean, to reference the Dystopia Triptych again, the series, I wrote that story series inspired by things that I read in 1984. So it just seemed to make sense from the very beginning that I would be doing something in the speculative realm. And it was interesting coming out of my MFA and starting to publish and realizing that there was so many great writers that was writing speculative fiction in the Virgin Islands. And it was a pleasure to meet you at a con and get to meet Tiffany Yannick. Tiffany Yannick read my book and blurbed it. It was just a huge honor to just be a part of this, what I think is a growing tradition. And I mean, I should also mention Kason Calendar, who also writes speculative fiction as well. And so, yeah, I want to give you the same question, like what got you into this? How did you decide that speculative fiction was the thing you wanted to do?
It's a very similar story to yours. I started reading science fiction because it was exciting. I got my hands on it as an early reader. And I just loved the adventure. And when I was reading, Chimamanda Ngozi talks about the myth of the single narrative. And obviously I passed for white, but I come from a mixed family. So one of the dilemmas was eventually it started to penetrate into my consciousness that the science fiction I was reading was incredibly pale. And I kind of started to do things like draw. I have a whole, just stack of drawings from back when I was in high school of starships landing in Charlotte Amalie Harbor, right? I would just sit on the deck of the boat I was growing up on and sketch. And I'd always do these like, cruise ship looking alien starships landing and doing stuff. And, but in my own fiction, because I wanted to be a science fiction writer so badly, because I wanted to live with story. Paul Keynes Douglas will be talking tomorrow. I grew up listening to Paul Keynes Douglas on the radio, right? I would tune in every time. He was the first person, the first human being I was aware of that made a living, as far as I could tell as a child, made a life out of story, right? So I knew I wanted that for myself, and I wanted it to be science fiction. So I threw myself at that. And somewhere in high school and part of the way in college, when I started to read history more and sort of, get a little more radicalized, so to speak, I started to kind of grapple with the fact that what I was writing was not my experience of the world. And so I started to begin to slowly put in stuff, and I felt like I was a horrible, horrible person for not realizing that I could look to my background for my fiction until I saw that, speech by Chimamanda, and I went, oh, it's not just me.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, it took me a while to start writing about the Virgin Islands too in my own fiction. It just, for a long time, it just didn't occur to me. I was reading a lot of work. One of my favorite writers is Ursula Le Guin, and it's fantastic work, but not set in the Virgin Islands. So I had a background assumption in my mind that I couldn't write about the VI and have it be speculative fiction. But once that broke open for me, it was like, huge. Like, and now like everything's influenced from the Virgin Islands. Even when I'm not writing about the Virgin Islands, something is influenced by it. And so, yeah.
So the whole reason I wrote the story that was in the Best American Science Fiction anthology that we were Table of Contents buddies in is that I was attending at my very first VI Lit Fest a presentation by a fellow Grenadian. I was born in Grenada. And she'd done this really great research studying resistance movements pre-revolutionary Grenada, and looking at how people use slowdowns, taking orders literally, all of these tactics to kind of fight back against the English colonial system of the time and the English plantocracy before that. And I was so inspired by that that I went back and did some more reading. And even though the story in there is like about a science fiction robot, crazy interstellar, stuff, all of the framework of the story came out of that, just kind of studying the stuff that presenter had kind of shown me a route into. So yeah, the same thing is like, for me, even Karen Lord once said it after reading one of my short story anthologies or collections. She said, like, you can take the boy out of the Caribbean, but you can't take the Caribbean out of the boy. She was just constantly calling out all the little references I had back to the islands that no one in America would notice.
Right, that's amazing.
Do you find you have like two different kinds of readers? Do you have like, and when you talk to readers who are down in the islands, how do they interpret what you're writing differently than, say, your American audience?
Yeah, I mean, it's so different, right? Like, one of the things that I remember when I did an event back home was the person that was talking to me complimented me on the work. They really enjoyed the book, but they also like corrected me in a few things, and I remember that like quite fondly. They were like, well, if you're going down Garden Street, you have to turn right to get to 99 steps, not left, or I'm probably mixing it up. And so there's just this like engagement with place that I find when I'm talking to people from back home, and they know the places, so they understand some of the context, even some of the context that I don't. Like growing up there, I took for granted a lot of things that I thought I knew it. And then going back and like doing research, even doing the research for the book, like I did some research for the slave insurrection of 1733 that happened on St. John, because I wanted to write a scene set there. And just so much that I didn't know, and context about St. Thomas I didn't know, and places in St. Thomas that were kind of like hidden in a way that I'd never been to. And I just find that like when I'm engaging with people from back home, they're asking me those kind of questions like, like, that's interesting. Why didn't you talk about this? Or, oh, I really like that you talked about this. This is something that's like really personal to me. And that's always been like really rewarding. I want to ask you the same thing. Like when you talk to people from back home about your work, what are the kinds of stuff that jumps out for them?
I mean, there's definitely the place thing. I got the same correction as you did on my novel, Hurricane Fever, which has, I mentioned kind of like a direction in Red Hook, and I'm dyslexic. So it's really, I'm always confusing left and right, and they called me out. They're like, that would be on the other side, and I was like, yeah, you're right. The other hard thing is tone. One of the things I get a lot of is tone differentials. I write something that is fueled by anger or a big emotion that people will find, will receive it differently. My story, Toy Planes, when I read it in the islands, people have a really strong emotional reaction to it. But the first time I read it for an American audience, everyone laughed because they thought it was a funny story about a bunch of Caribbean people building a spaceship and launching it, right? They thought that was hilarious. And for me, it was like this story about like, no, space is ours too. And it had all my feelings and hopes and aspirations in it. Like, we would, as Caribbean people, play on the same stage as everyone else. And when this American audience started laughing as I was reading it, it slayed me. And I didn't read it again for like years and years and years and years until I was first invited down to Barbados, and I read it there, right? And I was like really scared because it was the first time I'd ever read my work to an island audience live, and so I had to bring my A game. And because we have people like Dr. Liverpool and great orators, you know, in our tradition. So I read this story and people were struck by it. They had the right emotions, you know, and that meant a lot to me. And you know,
we have
that
a few
meant a lot.
questions. Thank you very much. We have a few questions for Cadwell and Tobias. Here's a question. Alexa says, I think what Cadwell says answers our question about getting children to enjoy reading on their own. Teachers unfortunately are tasked to teach reading in an environment bogged by bureaucracy and politics. Students who have no interest in reading then learn to associate reading with work. Having adults in their lives like parents read for entertainment shows a child that reading can be enjoyable. They mimic the people they love. We need to perhaps consider how to get more adults to read rather than put the entire weight on the shoulders of our youth. And then another question was, where can we buy your work?
So I have a really strong reaction to that, what that person said, which is to say, yes, absolutely. I talk about this thing that happens. I'm an English major. I love literature, but there's this thing that happens sometimes when we teach, which is that we approach literature like cod liver oil. It's good for you. You should have it, right? And for a child, that doesn't feel good. And the reason I fell into loving literature and particularly science fiction was because I read a lot of trash. Like, people are always really concerned about kids reading trash. I read all the Star Trek novels. I don't want to call them trash. I'll probably get angry letters from the people who wrote them. But I mean, you read all kinds of things, and you never know what a kid's gonna latch onto. I have two young daughters, and as a science fiction writer, Dad wants them to read science fiction desperately. And I had to be careful to not push it on them, right? Because they weren't interested for a long time. But we just left books around constantly, took them to libraries constantly. And if they didn't like a book, it'd be like, okay, don't read it. Don't read it. Don't feel forced to read it. And finally, a year ago, they found a book, the book. There's always one book. There's always the book that suddenly opens up the fact that reading is this whole world. And for them, it was a series of dragon adventure books by a middle grade author. And they've read 14 of them. They just like blew through them. And it's all they talk about. It's all they're obsessed with. And they're starting to read other books now, right? Like they've gone over the edge. And so that is like, I think you got to find what the kid loves. And we got to introduce them to lots and lots and lots and lots of books and tell them it's okay. It's okay to give up on books. It's okay to like focus in on stuff that you like. And then when they get older and better, then you can give them cod liver oil and say, well, you know, there are books you like, and then there are books you have to read because you're in school.
Right. Yeah, I just want to reiterate that. Yeah, it took me way too long to read for fun, and once I started doing it, it was like, it was huge for me. And so yeah, that's the thing that Tobias is right on by saying that you need to like give your kids things that are fun to read and that they'll develop the taste. It's not even like you need to force them to read harder books. They will read harder books as they go along because they'll be interested in deeper questions. And so those things that might seem like cod liver oil will become the things that they need to nourish their soul.
I noticed that Mr. Lee, John Lee, had a question, and it's a little long. I'm just wondering if he could unmute his mic and ask the question. Is Mr. Lee here?
I think I have to elevate Mr. Lee as the panelist.
Okay.
John Lee, you should be allowed to talk now.
Thank you. Okay, I'm here now. Hearing me?
Yes.
Hold on.
Yes,
you
sir.
hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Right, okay. Yes, I had just put a question there for Tobias and Cadwell. What unique advantages, possibilities exist in using the speculative fiction, sci-fi, fantasy form? In other words, that particular form, what, in a sense, unique possibilities can it bring to Caribbean literature, given our political, cultural, social backgrounds? And I'm thinking of the achievements of Nalo Hopkinson, who has taken Caribbean folk tales and made speculative fiction, sci-fi with it, maybe Karen Lord also. So I'm just curious to know how you see, what interests you so much in this speculative fiction form? I know C.S. Lewis said he used that form because that best suited what you wanted to say. That's my question. You heard me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you, John.
No problem, man.
You want to answer first, Tobias, or should
no,
I
you
jump
go,
in?
Cadwell.
Okay, yeah. So, okay, I'll talk a little bit about, The Lesson, which is my debut novel that came out last year. I knew I wanted to talk about one thing, for example, colonialism, and I thought that using first contact alien invasion novel, like using that trope, I could talk about colonialism in a way that's fresh and that's applicable to people within the Virgin Islands and also people outside of the Virgin Islands, the Caribbean, and so I just it just one of those things that made sense thinking about that theme. I also wrote for the Best American Science Fiction and Fantasy, the same one that I was in with Tobias Buckell. I wrote about a Sukuyant, which is well, you all probably know what that is. It's like the way that I describe it is like a Caribbean vampire-like creature. And so I wrote about that because it was one of the stories that I heard growing up, and it, stuck with me, and it was such a strong impact. It had such a strong impact on me that I wanted to tell that story in as a genre story. And it was one of those things that just kind of it was a light bulb. Once I started writing that first page, it just all came out. So yeah, I just feel like there's this unique role that speculative fiction does for the global imagination. I think that for the Caribbean, it also has that role, and the Caribbean is very unique. And one thing I was thinking about before this conversation was thinking about the Caribbean and its relationship to power and empire. There's a great connection you can make to universe empires or galactic empires. There's just this easy one-to-one that just makes sense. And so there's just a lot of ways that Caribbean and speculative just make complete sense.
So many of the science fiction narratives are about dealing with empire, and they don't there's a different viewpoint that you can have if you're coming from the islands than America, which is empire. The other thing I say is when I was first doing this, I would get challenged a lot why I was trying to bring the Caribbean into science fiction. And I would say, if we don't imagine our own futures, someone else will imagine them for us. And they may not have our best interests at heart. Imagining futures is what gives rise to the possibilities of those futures. It allows us to examine possibilities, to warn us away from some, to advocate for others, and just to imagine them allows us to create a space where people are not always just dwelling on what is now or what is past, which is important to shape the future, but also saying that there are three parts of time: past, present, and future. And if we only ever imagine past and present, we are limiting ourselves by cutting off an entire 1/3 of time and space. So if we imagine our own futures, then we can have a say in our own futures.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Right. So I think we're just about out of time, and we thoroughly enjoyed that. That was absolutely inspiring and fun to just sit and listen to and just to enjoy what you're saying. I think everything you're saying is so relevant to the Virgin Islands now and the Virgin Islands in the future. And so,
Alscess?
Yes?
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. One, thank you so much for having us on here and to speak to this audience. Thank you, audience, for showing up. And secondly, if you're interested in Caribbean science fiction, please go to www.caribbeansf.com, where we're trying to keep a bibliography of works that engage with the fantastic science fiction and fantasy. And you can find many of our titles there. And we're a couple years out of date, but I swear we will catch up. So if you're interested in this, go to caribbeansf.com. Thank you. I'm sorry, Alscess. I just want to make sure they had that resource.
Great. Cadwell, do you have a final word there?
Yeah, someone asked earlier about
your new book. Tell us about your new book that's coming up. Where can we get it?
Yes. So as I said, The Lesson is about, and it's an alien first contact novel set in the Virgin Islands. There's some historical moments in the book. There's also some moments that deal with the present and the future. It is available anywhere. You can search it online. I think The bookstore in St. Croix has it now in paperback. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it through Barnes & Noble.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, at this point in time, I'd like to thank you, gentlemen, again for taking the time to spend some time and share with us. And the next segment, and then we'll move right into the readings. That will be the segment that will be run by Dr. Patricia Pierre. And I know that our illustrator, Elisa McKay, is in the audience, and I know she wants to say something about her cover, her striking cover, and we're going to do that as soon as we're finished with this segment. Dr. Pierre.
Hi, Alscess. I'm glad to be here today. This is really exciting. Thank you for everyone who's been a part of getting this together. I have to admit, though, I don't have the program in front of me. I wasn't able to get it to bring it up, but I am here, and I'm glad to share a couple of poems. I'm glad that other people also be reading, but you're going to have to help me out. Sorry about that.
Okay, you have. I think you might only be able to do one poem.
That's fine.
And then we have. Then the SD Brown is in your feed, and Natalie, Corthesy, and Celia Sorhaindo, and they're going to be coming right one behind the other.
I'm behind.
Running a little bit behind time.
Okay, one poem is fine. Then I'll just choose the one I'm proud that won a prize when it was published in Caribbean Writer, and it's called The Wings of Moths and Hummingbirds. So won the Humanities Prize in 2007, and it's a sonnet. So for those of you who love sonnets, here we go. The wings of moths and hummingbirds invade my dreams. Their feathers stroke me, soft as suede. Awake, I watch for dawn, imagine love. The wings of dragonflies and brooding doves, of herons pure as light and parrots bright as day that rise to greet the sun. The sight of sugar birds with butter breasts, the sound of thrushies bold but liquid voiced. I found illuminate my heart, inform my words all day. I look for terns and gulls, those birds whose wings cut sharp across the sky, who dive with pelicans through salt-rich sea. I thrive when hawks with fierce brown gaze and soft gray breasts lift up their wings to ride blue wind. I'm blessed. So thank you. And now let me make way for some other excellent writers in the Caribbean so we can hear their work as well.
Okay, the next individual that's up is SD Brown. SD Brown. That person signed up for 306 to 311.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Okay. So I'm going to be reading a short story. I don't have to finish it. Love with the Calypso Cricketer. And I've been a teacher with the Department of Education in New York City for about 23 years. And I was working with a teacher and she told me, well, Clive Lloyd is my uncle and he's a cricketer. And I looked at her and I said, my dearest, in my mind, I was speaking, this lady has no concept as to who Clive Lloyd is and his relationship to cricket. And so therefore, I began to do research since I'm a cricket lover, and this story came about. And I took a trip to Grenada, and I love the island, and the setting is Grenada. So here it goes.
Okay, just a second before you start. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes. Just stop me when it is. I don't have to finish. Okay. When Dancer was a boy, his great uncle Ansel had taken him on a rigorous hike to the zenith of the island and had asked him to look down beyond. At first, he was stupefied, for he couldn't fathom the glory he felt as he glared at the tiny speckles of ransacked houses forming a trail along the serene blue coast. He felt as if he were on top of the world, and the people with their insignificant lives were beneath him. His great uncle Ansel was a cricketer, a fast bowler for the West Indian cricket team, and he would boast of the Grandmaster Clive Lloyd, Super Cat, and how he could swing a ball at an unstoppable speed across the sprawling field. Dancer was so enthralled by his uncle's grandiose stories of giant, godlike men who defeated the world with the simple tools of a wicket, bat, and ball, that he set his sights on being like them. It had taken him some 20 years to reach the apex of his career as a cricketer, only to have Hazel, his disillusioned wife, toss the failure of his marriage into his face. Horace, she'd shout, Pakistan is calling you, but I need you more. Hazel Armsby never got used to his constant traveling to countries like Australia, England, India, and Pakistan, South Africa, and Afghanistan. She has been to it all, and she has seen it all, and she has had a belly full of all this traveling, especially to places she didn't care to see. Besides, she had taken a leave of absence from the Department of Education in New York City to aid her ailing grandmother and to move back to the island to try to repair her marriage. The long-distance marriage did not work anymore, and he had to make a decision, or she. A cricketer is a man on the go, and as a wife, you should know it damned well. That's the problem with you, Dancer. You move around the place like a shadow on the prowl. When are we going to start that family? He was 31 years old and felt that there was time before he started a family. She, on the other hand, felt that time was moving quickly and her womb might soon be shriveled up. Horace hadn't been listening to her, and she decided to bicker to him to demand his attention. When Hazel's bickering would become unbearable, he'd run to his great Uncle Hansel to recapture the feeling he got from hearing his tall tales as a youth. Uncle Anson was now an old man living in the mountainous region of Victoria amid the height, the heat, and the senseless escapes from the scenarios of the real world. Dancer would always visit him during breaks from playing season, crossing the stony waters of the meandering rivers and the black holes of the creepy crawlers. Women flocked to him no more, and the little salary he used as sustenance was obtained from exporting nutmegs. Thompson and Lely were brutal fellows who played for the kill. He'd tell Dancer, in '75, we got a good licking. We took our humiliation like men, vowing never to lose again. As a boy, Dancer loved to hear Uncle Hansel's story of how the West Indian cricket team failed, then gloriously triumphed over the Australian team. He loved to see the devilish expression on Uncle Ansel's face when he saw Greg Chappelle brought to his friggin' knees. He might have shit his pants, boy, you'll never know, he'd say. I was there during the staggering heat and heard the angry shouts of black bastards go home. The crowd commanded Lely to kill us and we hit the dust. We blamed one another for our loss, but realized there could be victory if we put our heads through it. Uncle Anson was never a man of words except when he spoke about cricket. The flare of his African broad nostrils, the flicker of his bull red eyes would show his excitement. It was his uncle's love for cricket that had caused him to take this route in life. Now his life is at a crossroad, and he didn't know whether to give up his first love, for it was apparent that he wouldn't be another big bird Garner or fire a ball with the whispering death fury of Holden. His wife Hazel was on his back constantly for him to choose between her and his first love, cricket, and he didn't know what to do. Uncle Hanson was an astute man on these matters. When Dancer was a youth, he had seen his uncle pass up the chance of marrying the loveliest of women, and he didn't question him why. Once he quivered in terror when he saw Uncle Hanson through a large rock, barely grazing the small of a lover's back. The woman had questioned him about missing payments for his legitimate daughter, Girlie. Dancer witnessed the violence, but he didn't know what it meant. He was a man now, and he had been recruited in the torrid ways of love and hate and women and their damned bickering. It was now time for Uncle Hanson to reveal the reason behind, finish? Time is up?
Yes, wrap it up, that last sentence.
His hermetical ways and help Dancer to see clearly. Traveling along the high mountain trail amid the restorative fragrances of cinnamon and eucalyptus trees that arose his senses, Dancer went to seek understanding from a wise old man. Uncle Anson was now a man in his mid-70s with hair as silver blue as the soup dish he ate from. In '83, he was among the 18 rebel cricketers who played in South Africa despite the controversy. When he returned to the island, he realized that he had lost the hearts of the people. He was no longer a puffed up hero, but a worn out tramp who took to the hills to find solace.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, all right.
Thank you. I enjoyed reading that as well.
Thank you.
One of my pieces that I enjoyed. The next up is Natalie Corthesy. Natalie Corthesy.
Hi, good afternoon, Alscess. Thanks so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to participate with this distinguished group of writers. So today I wanted to read two poems, a short poem from volume 33 entitled The Watchman, and a slightly longer poem, The Helper Experiment, and I promise to be efficient with my time management.
Okay, you have around 4 minutes, so you have to be careful.
Okay.
You might not be able to read the whole one.
Okay, The Watchman. In Jamaican vernacular, the watchman is a very tiny piece of meat that you get at the top of food sometimes in very modest households. And I wanted to share that experience. The watchman. The watchman stood guard over a vast dominion of cracked rice and Negro yam. His modest stature, camouflaged by a rivulet of coconut rundown, zigzagging a lane between the hills of boiled dumplings, neighboring a single spoon of steamed callaloo. His indignation at being the codfish the uptown housewife refused was relinquished so that he might become the plebeian's caviar for the poor country girl that held his gaze. Sometimes she had food. Sometimes she had none. Sometimes she had no shoes, and there was no one to borrow from. Today she would eat and eat until her teeth drowned. Sunday's salty respite from the week's servitude. Always the last to be devoured, and the hero, children remember. The watchman protected bellies and inspired rebellion. The next poem is entitled The Helper Experiment. Mrs. Kingston 8. My ideal helper should be between 40 and 45 years old. I prefer a countrywoman accustomed to the simplicity of rural Jamaican life. Not from Portland, they're innately superstitious. Not from St. Mary, they're notoriously lazy. And not from St. Thomas, they're just plain duds. Helper number 1. My name is Pam. I'm from Watchwell, St. Elizabeth. I'm 36 years old and I have 5 children aged 20, 16, 14, and the twins just turned 2. I want a living job in Kingston. I will go home every other weekend. I can clean, wash clothes. I love to cook. I do not pick up dog shit. I do not clean people's shoes, and I do not wash female underwear. Mrs. Kingston 7. Most helpers have many children. If their children are young, they're more likely to steal. If she herself is too young, she's likely to steal your husband. Most have been abused as young girls by men they know, so multiple baby fathers is common. As a rule, the baby father is gone. Helper number 17. My name is Beverly. I am from Morspence, St. Catherine. I am 40 years old and I have no children. I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. I love to dust and sweep. I do not work on Sabbath days. I do not wear pants and I do not eat pork. Mrs. Kingston 6. Remove prices from the groceries so they do not know what you spend. They will eat anything from a tin. Mackerel, sardines, condensed milk and ground provisions. But you have to ration it, or they will eat you out of house and land. Label their plastic cup and plate and assign them utensils. Uniforms are essential. It's a reminder they're at work and that your house is not their home. Helper number 33. My name is Kenisha, but everybody calls me Pinky. I'm from Vere Clarendon. I'm 28 years old. I have 4 children who are in England with my mother. I live with my boyfriend. I do not eat white people food, curry, or anything with vinegar. I do not clean windows, I do not wash clothes by hand, and I do not do yard work. Mrs. Kingston 8. An admission of romantic involvement is a warning of imminent pregnancy. If she expresses aversion to specific foods, it is likely she believes in duppies. Wearing a tie head with leaves or a red ribbon, bottles with oil, bush collecting, or candle burning is incontestable proof of obia. Mrs. Kingston 7. To assuage the hardship of separation from loved ones, give her a television in her room and weekly mobile phone credit. Never invite her to eat at the dining table with the family. It causes confusion of her proper place. The Last Helper. My name is Millicent. I am from Heart Ease, Manchester. I am 42 years old. I have 2 children. My son is 23 and my daughter is 19. I can read and write. I have always been a helper. I put my children through school on my helper's salary, and my son graduated university. I need the job to make up the school fee for my daughter. I love to cook brown stew chicken, rice and peas with coconut milk, and fried ripe plantains. Miss, I can do everything. Mrs. Kingston 6. If she's too good to be true, it's too good to be true. Give her a weekly schedule. Empty her bag on payday and install security cameras. Lock away your jewelry and anything you buy in bulk. If your children do not like her, she's conniving. Mrs. Kingston 8. When resentment sets in, she will complain to labor authorities that you have underpaid her and make fraudulent allegations to the police to blackmail you. All helpers have an expiry date. Fire her before she spits in the food. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next is Celia Sorhaindo.
Hi everyone. I'm calling from Dominica. I just want to say, just quickly, big thank you to the VI Lit Fest and the Caribbean Writer for this wonderful, wonderful event. And also the Caribbean Writer was one of the first magazines that accepted my work, and I was sending off work and just getting rejection after rejection. And July 2015, I got 2 acceptances within few days. That was the Caribbean Writer and Moco magazine. So from then on, really, that gave me the encouragement that I really needed at that time. So thank you so much. The poem I'm going to read is from volume 31. The Caribbean Writer has fantastic front covers. And this one is called Accent Stress. I was born in Dominica, but we migrated to England when I was just 8. Hence this accent, and I came back home in 2005 with said accent, and it has not gone yet. So, accent stress. I write to warn about the weight of an accent, the unexpected prejudice against vocal tones, acute stress hung over deemed guilty head. I write to talk about the trial of an accent. Syllables, soft, sheepish, conjure mammoth misdeeds. Jury deaf to words, judged by inflection. I write to spill about the stain of this accent. Diacritic label branding me as other, condemning me as grave deserter of my tribe. I wasn't cautioned about the curse of this accent, an abracadabra genie that won't disappear, words wedged like ruby slippers leading back to surrogate home. I wasn't prepared for the price of this accent, naively acquired, infinitely dear, marks me circumflex archery that fed youth to another. I didn't try to treasure my accent, insidious new lilt so slyly invaded, native tongue tied, put out like garbage. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you very much. Okay, it's now 3:38. We're moving right along. Our next segment will be, introduction will be by Yvette McMahon, the Secretary of the Virgin Islands Literary Festival and Book Fair. And she will be introducing our next workshop. Ms. McMahon-Arnold? Can't hear you. Unmute yourself. You're mute.
Got it. Yes. Thank you. Good afternoon, all. Okay, it's such a pleasure to be here. Okay, hello, everyone. I see quite a number of participants on here. Actually, I count 86 participants. So I want to welcome you and express how grateful we are that you're able to join us today. My name is Yvette McMahon-Arnold, as Alscess indicated. I'm one of the executive members of the Virgin Islands Literary Festival and Book Bacchanal. This segment that's coming up is a memoir writing workshop. Now, we know that memoirs allow us to capture events in our personal lives. And I just want to say that no doubt many of us have been regularly journaling about things that are happening with our lives and have been wanting to transition some of these daily thoughts into something more tangible. And some of these daily musing can actually serve as the roots that grow into the selections that become the Caribbean writer whose 34 years of accomplishments we are honoring over these 2 days. So here to guide us through this writing journey is Rozena Maart, a South African writer and professor currently living in Durban. She's the director for the Center for Critical Research on Race and Identity. Rozena has been recognized for her writing and for her work opposing apartheid and violence against women. She has lectured throughout Canada, the United States, and many parts of the world. She was actually here with us in person for the 2018 VI Lit Fest. Please help me welcome Rozena to guide us through this memoir writing workshop. Rozena, welcome.
Thank you very much, everybody. I'm going to try and stand. Thank you to the organizers for organizing such an interesting and important event. Now, I know that I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to try and go through the steps very concisely and as quickly as I can, but also to make sure that I give you enough material to work from. I've got a whiteboard at the back here, so I'm going to write on it so to make sure that you can see. So just to start very quickly, for most of us know who've been educated on the African continent and in the Caribbean, and I'm going to say places where the British have colonized, where we got taught English literature. We never saw that literature as ethnic in any way. The minute Black people and people of color began to write our own stories, it was referred to as auto-ethnographic. So I think part of this, what I want to do today, is just give you different segments of what is regarded as autoethnography or what is also regarded as life writing. So generally for this workshop, I do something called writing memory. I also do a workshop called writing memory, writing the body. And the reason for this is that I think we know that in most colonized places in the world, we know that the body is the site upon which oppression, colonization has found a place, and it's from the body that we launch our decolonization, interestingly enough, from the previous speaker who also talked about speech and accents. So to bring memoir writing and life writing and autoethnography together, why is it that we as writers go to memoir writing or life writing? We go to memoir writing and life writing because our stories have not been told. We know that Black women have existed in English literature as, you know, the enslaved or the maid or all of the kind of ways in which racial tropes have operated. So we've never been the sort of focus of the actual story. And this is precisely why we have so many women, Black women and women of color in the last 40 years that have gone to life writing and writing what we call autoethnography and memoir. So having said that, it's incredibly important, I hope you can see that, it's incredibly important that as we start, we ask ourselves questions about who we are. Now, for many of us, you know, our histories have been kept away from us as part of the history of colonization. So when we start to write about our history, our lives, our memoirs, we ask ourselves, we place ourselves in the center, and we call this the subject. So we ask ourselves, who is the subject, right? So let's say you are the subject, right? It's important to ask yourself this particular question, right? So I think I know some of you, and last year I talked about how my surname, M-A-A-R-T, is from the third month of the year for the Dutch, March, and how my grandfather's ancestors were colonized by the Dutch during the month of March, and my grandmother's during the month of September, and my cousins during the month of April. So I know, as somebody who's grown up as a Black South African from a previously enslaved community, that my history was not something that I was encouraged to ever think about or write about. You know, we were schooled on the Jane Eyres and the Shakespeares, and like everybody else, I think most people in this, on the program and participating know this history of British colonization, and of course, with the United States empire building, it's pretty much a similar situation, where the Black woman subject or the Black man subject is either in the text, whether it's fictional or non-fictional, as the previously enslaved, the colonized, the person who's the laborer, the persons whose servitude we learn. So as we go about this, we place ourselves in the center. We ask ourselves, what is there to know about ourselves? What is there to know about me as a Black woman subject? Now, in the work that we do, we know that we have histories. So our second circle is, and I'm gonna go back and forth to your main circle. So your main circle is here, and your second circle is here. In other words, what is the history of the subject, right? What do we know about the history of, let's just say, for the discussion, this Black woman subject? In other words, what do you know about your parents, your grandparents, on your mother's side, on your father's side, on your grandfather's side, on your great-grandfather, paternal, maternal side? Okay, and why is this important? First of all, in any form of memoir or life writing, we know that as Black people, we have been part of a process where the genre that we know as writing has put us in a position, forcibly, to write the language of the colonizer, right? That is the English language. That language is systemic, it is institutionalized, and it's structural. And because it is all of those things, it fits within the larger operation and functioning of a system of white domination, otherwise also called ideologically a system of white supremacy, right? But the colonizer's language has rules. It has the start of the capital letter, the colon for the regulation of the sentence, in the same way that colon comes from the word colonized, as you know, to regulate and control the masses. So not only is the Black woman subject who wants to write about herself and her history, the second layer here, facing all of the complexities with which colonization has brought upon us, it also means that we have several layers through which we have to pierce into language this very language, this very English language of colonization and rip it open and ask ourselves, where do we insert ourselves? Where do we make this language through which we were educated and schooled, because many of us don't know what our original, if there is such a thing, or our mother tongue would have been, could have been. In my case, I know some of it on my paternal grandfather's side, because his background is Croix. But I was born at a time when English and Afrikaans, which is Old Dutch, were the official languages in South Africa. So I have to learn a couple of things. I have to learn that I'm going to have to uncover what is hidden, what is forbidden, and what is repressed, okay? Repressed is one of the psychological mechanisms of the unconscious. What is hidden and what is forbidden, that has been part of the English language, the occupation of the English language, the way in which Frantz Fanon talks about how colonizers' language, how when you speak that language of the colonizer, you hold up the civilization of that language. And this is why when we, as Black women or women of color, when we begin life writing, when we begin memoir writing, we ask ourselves, like, which language am I going to write in? Am I going to write in my home Cape vernacular? Am I going to write in patois? Which language do I write in? Which language is the language of my soul, of my heart, of my ancestors? Because your ancestors may not speak the same language that you, as the colonized person of the English language, speak. So you have to recognize that all of the ways in which this interplay is present in your life as somebody who speaks, somebody who thinks in the language of the colonizer, somebody who writes in the language of the colonizer. These are complexities that you have to engage with as you start this process. It is not something you can leave unattended. It is not something you can leave at the door. It's not something you can leave outside of your written page, however you want to construct. You want to say, I want to start this process. The process doesn't start on the piece of paper. The process starts when you start the journey of understanding what is memoir, what is memory, in whose language is that memory, what is life writing, who am I, what is my history, what is my history of speaking, of thinking, of making meaning, what is my history of imagination. Okay, so with taking all that in mind, what you've got the subject, which is you, you've got the subject's history, which is your family, your ancestry, your history. But then you have your third layer, which is almost your history, the history of that history. For example, I have, from a very early age, had these dreams of what I later began to recognize, and when a word was given to it, it was called tsunamis. But not when I spoke to my grandparents, none of them, my grandfather his history is from South Africa. He's from the Xhosa people. My grandmother, her heritage was, they were colonized by the Dutch, enslaved and brought from Java to the Cape. But it was only when I met my father's mother did I discover that her heritage is, she actually has the word S-L-A-V-E on her birth certificate, and her heritage came from Saint Helena. Now, I'm just going to do a quick map of Africa over there. Sorry, that's not very good. But just off the coast of Senegal, Saint Helena is where Napoleon was banished, right? So Saint Helena was once owned, occupied, usurped by the French, the Portuguese, the Dutch, and finally the English. So we know that even in our dreams we have, and Freud was very keen at first to dismiss this. There was a person who was called Lamarck, and he believed that we also inherit dreams. So in the same way that you inherit the walk of your father, the nose of your mother, the way that you use your hands from your great grandmother, you also inherit dreams. So writing is not only about memory that you can recall. Writing memoirs, doing life writing is also about trying to understand the history of your dreams. Are you with me? So we've got the subject, we've got the history of the subject, and then we've got the history of the subject's history. In other words, the history of how the different ancestors, like your maternal and paternal, and their histories, how that come into play. So it's not just about you at the center of an event of, oh, I was forcibly removed, or I want to write from this moment on. The whole point about memoir writing and life writing is that you soon discover that it's not a point that you get to choose. The experience of the writing will make it clear this is a part that you should start with. Many people try to start from a memory at the age of 8. So, for example, I wrote my first kind of work was a poetry book, and then I wrote a short story, and later wrote 4 other stories several years later to form Rosa's District 6. But I wrote my first fictional short story because I had hives every year on the same day that we were forcibly removed from District 6. So for me, the writing of my life and my history began when I realized that how could I overlook this important historical event that had crept into my skin and into my body, where the same day, every single year, I got these big, big fat hives that covered my whole body. And the point about doing this kind of work is that you cannot leave your body outside of it. Your body is always central to the way that life writing and memoir writing happens. Please indicate if I've gone over the time. I try to keep time at one point, but I'm not sure.
You've gone over a little. You've gone over by 2 minutes.
Okay, let me just quickly go. So the other section, your 4th segment, your 4th circle, is you want to also look at history books, and you want to make sure that certain facts and information you find is accurate. Like, for example, if your grandparents or your great-grandparents have given you some information on the history of the country, you want to make sure that happens. And then the 5th segment I want to say is to make sure that you're always writing. Wherever you feel there's something that is a burning concern for you, something happens, it is a particular day, it's a holiday, it's a celebration, you're writing on a piece of tissue paper, keep it, don't discard it. Life writing and memoir writing is, you are the onion. There's always an unpeeling. The hidden and forbidden aspects of your life and your identity has to be unpeeled by you. You are the subject that unpeels. And that process is something that involves speech, it involves imagination, it involves writing. I sometimes call it blood writing because it comes from a place that you do not always control. It can be your ancestors, it can be your history. It is all of the ways in which you as the subject is situated. And I'm going to end there, not to take up any more time. Thank you for the
Rozena, thank you so much. Can you stick around for 2 or 3 questions? Because I think it's important that we have an opportunity to ask you a few questions.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And you know, I thank you always for agreeing to help us whenever we have these moments where we need a voice like yours. So thank you. Any questions? That I'm so sorry. That's Dr. McMahon-Arnold.
Yes, Alscess.
You know, I go right ahead. She has 3 minutes. She has time for 3 questions.
Okay. Are there any questions for Rozena? Anyone, or even a comment based on what you've heard?
Is the question section working? It doesn't appear to be.
I haven't seen any movement since the 3 questions, so you go ahead and ask your question, Tim.
Yes.
Okay, well, I just wanted to say that I found that most interesting. Well, I found all of them interesting. I love cricket, and so I went immediately to that one. And interestingly, it was a female in New York who was writing about West Indian cricket. It was wonderful. Of course, West Indian heritage. That just now, I found it really interesting, and especially the one that talks about, you know, going back to your previous, your ancestors. And I'm finding that I'm doing a lot of that nowadays, and I really appreciated the learnings from it.
Thanks for that comment, Tim. Any other any questions or any comments? I'm kind of checking the chat as well.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Something that I would like her to clarify with me, which because I find it rather interesting. Hidden, forbidden, and what's the last one? I could not see it. Hidden, forbidden, and...
Hidden, forbidden, and repressed.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, that's all.
Thank you. Anyone else? Comment or question?
The questions in the Q&A.
Let me go to the...
There's a question from Nicole in the chat.
In the chat from Nicole, the chat, okay, let me go there quickly. Okay, that was excellent. Let me scroll up a wee bit. Rozena, you are amazing. I'm peeling back the onion and ready to eat grapes after listening to you. My memoir is called Elbow Dreams, a Black Girl Growing Up in Vermont during 1960. That was a comment from one of our panelists. Okay, I'm not seeing a question from Nicole. Okay, I see. This can always be a painful process and a rewarding process, right? That's from Jacqueline. Rozena?
Yes, I think for me, it was certainly both. I had, you know, my grandmother had taken me to the doctor to try and find out what the hives were about. And I think until I made the connection, and I also started my first story writing in my own patois and my own home language, it's a mixture of English, but the opening of Rosas District 6 is an 8-year-old girl talking, and there's no full stops, there's no commas, there's no punctuation. And I felt that I needed to do that because that was the voice that was the most present to me and the most memorable of my 8-year-old, myself as an 8-year-old child who at that stage had not been contaminated by the English language, because the English language is formal. It doesn't allow the voice of the child who wants to say what she wants to say. So yes, the process can be painful. It can be rewarding. It depends on what you regard as rewarding. For me, the reward is having our voice and making sure that we write the kind of literature that we also want to read.
Okay, thank you for that. Alscess, I beg your indulgence, a couple more. Does a memoir have to be completely factual, or can you embellish certain facts for the protection of others?
I think a memoir can be both. I often make a distinction between life writing and memoir writing. I think often in memoir writing, the author may decide to use different, like either protected names for various people. It's important to have factual information as quite significant in your memoir, because you want to keep the flow of certain dates. But I also think so many people that I know who started off writing memoir immediately switched to life writing because they felt that there are a lot of experiences that have deeper psychological meaning that they discover as they go along. So yes, fact finding and factual information is very important in memoir, but it doesn't have to all be factual information.
Okay, thank you, Rozena. And then just to wrap up, not questions, a couple of comments just to give voice to the comments from the chat. One, Rosena's note on finding the language of the soul resonated with me. That's from you, Trace. Rosena's presentation was insightful and beautifully presented. I really appreciated the way she foregrounded the importance of the body within her description. And
there's one more question. Ms. Yvette, if you look and see, there's a question from Marilyn Bradford Hall to all panelists.
Okay. Go ahead and read that one. I'm not seeing it. Go ahead and read it in the interest of time.
Okay. Trauma is such a ubiquitous part of all our stories. How can writing our stories be used for our young people and adults to capture the pain and triumph of their own or our lives and help to break patterns? Did you get that, Rozena?
Yes, I think for me, the breakthrough was when I realized that I could be in charge of the trauma. And once you tell about the trauma, you are taking a different position. You are the subject who's speaking to and writing on the trauma. And once you take charge of it, it's very different. The trauma is no longer the trauma because it doesn't pain you, it doesn't haunt you. When something is imposed upon you and you are suffering through it, that's a very different position. And that is what trauma does. We know that in my case, for example, forced removal, or in many cases that I hear, racism or different forms of racism, for example, caused lots of trauma to people, different kinds of trauma, right? And the minute you as the person, if you have to decide, how am I going to take charge? Writing for me was one thing that I could do, that I felt that I needed to do. Because it was for me the recreation of a community from which I was robbed, from which we were forcibly removed. And I wanted to, if you open, for example, the first story, you can smell the food, you can smell the cinnamon, you can smell the peanut butter, you can hear the workers on the street, you can smell the fish. My grandfather was a fisherman. So I was living outside of Cape Town, where I'm from, and I needed to kind of, once I made the connection that it happened every year on the same day that we were forcibly removed, I began to take charge of the trauma. And taking charge meant also trying to recreate the fond memories that I had of that time. And it included all of those experiences. So that is what I did. And I think everybody will choose their own path, their own route. But I say this very strongly. As somebody who's also taught writing workshops with young people in sexual assault support centers, part of experiencing ourselves as humans who triumph is to take charge of the trauma.
Yeah, Carol Henneman is saying that the soul must be freed for the true voice, so that true voice, quote unquote, can emerge. And one, Georgina is wondering about new languages to have a new conversations regarding racism.
Okay.
Any thoughts on that? And I'll turn it back over to Alscess. New languages to have new conversations regarding racism. Any thoughts, Rozena?
Yes, I'll speak to that. I just saw that somebody, Elaine, just said, what might be sacrificed when you move from mother tongue
to foreign language? Yes.
So Elaine, let me just say, I did move from, I don't know if that's my mother tongue, but the language, the patois that I grew up speaking, I let Rosa, the character, take up the first two or three pages in my text, because she is she's the reason why I wrote the story. And then I moved to formal English. But in all of the writing, I still used words and phrases that I knew as a child. I think that in this day and age, we also have publishers who are very keen to capture those kinds of authentic voices. We're not talking about 30, 40 years ago when you had to sound like you're writing a Jane Eyre, or you had to sound like, you know, any one of the Bronte sisters. So that's definitely happening around the globe. In terms of racism, I'm also a visual writer. So in some of my papers, I don't only write fiction. I would also like write in the margins, or I would write in a visual way that rearranges the text, because I think to get people to shift from what is regarded as, you know, the formal way of reading something, right, also means they have to think about where you're thinking, where are you reading, where are you placing the words, and rearranging the text visually is also a mechanism through which I think we get readers to try to understand. For example, in The Writing Circle, which is a novel that I have, the person who is sexually assaulted doesn't look at the person the perpetrator. She's looking, and so the readers get to see what the neighbors are doing because she has dissociated. So I'm not telling you that she's dissociated. That was a very difficult text to write, but I felt as Cape Town, we have one of the highest you know, records and statistics on gender-based violence. So when you are reading about the neighbors and everybody around, you know that she's dissociating because you know that she has taken that separation from her body. And I think that part of what happens with racism as well is that when we experience it, we also dissociate. Sometimes we feel the pain of what has happened days after, minutes after. So I think that many of us, many of us have developed and continue to develop different techniques for writing certain things. And it's about engaging our reader, it's about engaging ourselves. Sometimes it's about disengaging in order to engage. So it's about finding your technique, looking at different ways that actually captures your experience, and you are able to read that as a reader as well.
Rozena, let me say thank you for this deep, stirring workshop and subsequent conversation. I'm so reluctant to turn it back over to Alscess, but I must. I want to say thank you for all that you've stirred in all of us, so many of us, in particular me, and also thanks for those questions from the participants and for your comments and the like. Alscess, it's back over to you.
I'm reluctant to accept. This gift that Yvette is trying to give back to me, but we have to move on. Next up, we have a segment of 4 writers, and it started off by the segment leader would be Laurie Watts-Herons. Is Laurie here? Laurie Watts-Herons, okay. I have a feeling that there's a little situation. I'm going to have to give her a call. It might be a communication situation there. So we will move to the next person is Althea Romeo-Mark, and she sent us a video. She's in Switzerland. She was here earlier. She spent a good 40 minutes with us. She is a Virgin Islander who has lived in Liberia and Switzerland and England, and she was born in Antigua, but she came to the Virgin Islands. Oh, there she is. There you are. So we're ready for your piece. We will have, Adrian will play the video.
My name is Romeo-Mark, and I am a Caribbean poet. Maybe you haven't heard much about me, but I was born in Antigua. I grew up in St. Thomas, Virgin Islands. I lived and taught in Liberia, West Africa for 14 years, and now I live in Switzerland, and it's almost 30 years now. I write poetry and short stories and personal essays about my own experience in life. I've traveled quite a lot and have lived in different cultures. The first poem I'm going to read, The Returned, is about my own family history. It's about my grandmother and her brother, my great uncle, who immigrated to the Dominican Republic from Antigua in the early 1900s. Some returned not too long after they immigrated, and others returned almost 75 years later. The Returned, this almost mythical tale that began 150 years ago, is leaving a 21st century trail. It is about what we learned from our fathers and what they told about their mothers and grandmothers, fathers and great-grandfathers, uncles and great-uncles, going back to times we do not know, times alive in the stories we heard. Our British West Indian ancestors, not happy with their lot, set out to change their fortunes in the land of merengue, bachata, and salsa. Not wanting to stray too far from home, they passed on Cuba, Panama, Belize, Venezuela, and swarmed like ants to the sugar industry in Santo Domingo, where they would in time be labeled Los Cocolos. In time, screwed social and political laws, sharpening like machetes, cut the darker skinned down to size. They saw their fields of dreams slashed stalks in sugarcane fields. And navel strings calling, looking back from where they had come, some began to uproot themselves from a centuries-old abode to seek their ancestral home. The returned in a new yet old land must learn again the language and ways of their forefathers. A tight embrace does not greet them all, for they have become strangers to their kin. Some not sharing their DNA are suspicious, see them as invaders, and have declared them to be threatening, foreign-tongued job snatchers. The second poem is about my maternal grandmother, and it's called Photo Shoot. We stand on a stairway, our places dictated by height. We are not posing for Elle or Ebony. My visit from afar to a cousin's house has gathered us together, the offspring of a no longer feared granny. Gran is always a topic when we meet. In our words or writings, we admire her brazenness, crave her boldness. We want her fighting spirit, not the fighter. We want to box with her words. So we pose, the carriers of her genes, walk down memory lane, talk about the island life shared with her. We take her stories with us, still alive, still kicking. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Our next poet is Joshua Nelson.
Hello, Alscess.
Yes, good afternoon. Joshua is hailing from India.
Yeah, I'm from India. I just want to thank you for letting me part of this wonderful event. It's such a great experience to be just here listening to great writers from all across the world. I'm just thankful to be here. Today I would like to read the poem called A Silent Prayer from the Corner, which is yet to come in the volume 35, I think. I think I will start right away. The world wants reasons, it demands judgment, but don't let anyone convince you you're scarce or a memento of your sin. It chills my bones to hear gossips in the streets. Because of this, he is homeless. Because of that, she lost her husband. The planet is graceful enough to carry the signs and the drums. Somewhere a white flower blooms in a Jane's garden, and I think it's fair. There is no uniformity in the universe, no plain lands. Bad thing happens to good people, and it's fine. I wish people could realize this before judging, and if they can't, I hope they lead a life full of grace and never have to know what it feels like to be at the corner of the church and to leave before the final blessing prayer. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joshua. Thank you. Next, the next reader we have is Timothy Hodge.
Thank you. It is truly a pleasure to participate in this webinar and congratulate the organizers, the panelists and attendees for making this a great success. I was a little shocked when I looked at the contributors list and it referred to me first as a poet and avid traveler, then to my studies, and then to my career. My 4 poems published do come out of that nexus of being a poet and a traveler, so maybe the order is indeed correct. I had visited Africa several times before, but in December 2019, I returned to Africa, the year of the return, literally, figuratively, spiritually. In the UVI Passport of the World program, thanks Leslie, the Halls, Alscess, and my fellow travelers, I returned to Ghana, which I now know is responsible for a goodly portion of my ancestral DNA. And I was inspired to write. Well over a dozen poems now and counting, inspired by the stones which washed up on the beach next to my hotel at Amina Beach, just down the beach from the dungeons at Amina Castle, where my ancestors may have been shipped out from, inspired by the wailing of my colleagues at the Slave River at Asin Manso, and by so much more. I interrogated the past. It wasn't easy. Catharsis never is. Sankofa, I returned to fetch it. So here I go. Catharsis. From family and community, my ancestors were ripped, to be sold and shipped, shackled and marched to Asin Manso, Slave River, washed and displayed, branded and auctioned as they would animals, then marched once again to Africa's Gold Coast, crammed into dark dungeons, Cape Castle and Mina Castle, chained and shackled still, in sweltering heat and filth, in urine, feces, and blood. For days and weeks they stood, then shoved through the door of no return, to board the slave master's ship for Atlantic passages, Middle Passage trip. Cruelty continued, callously chained. Below deck they were crammed, darkness, disease, despair, death. Some were dumped, some jumped, chose watery grave to being a slave. On Caribbean shores others landed, to plantations for labor demanded, to toil all day without thanks or wage, whipped when weary, what outrage, to create wealth for the planter, to enrich the European colonizer, to suffer, and suffer again. Africa's loss was Europe's great gain. The price of sugar, the ancestors' blood, millions more in Middle Passages flood. Mothers, sisters, wives, and daughters, savagely raped, abused, raped again. Each act of resistance repaid in pain. Displacement, death, dehumanization, colonization, still no real emancipation. Sankofa, I returned to Africa to reconnect, to go back and fetch what I had left, to walk through the door of no return, back from my 400-year sojourn, to listen, to see, to learn the bitter truth, to search, to seek, to find my African roots, to walk where the ancestors walked, to hear the words with which they talked, to hear the wailing at Asin Manso of those who would see Africa no more, to see, to touch the memorial stones, to learn of African kingdoms and thrones, to cry, to weep, to wail, to rage within, to repent from my European ancestors' sin, to feel the horror, the anguish, the pain, to pledge never, never, never again. The memorial stones, the stones they left behind, formed by nature's hand, shaped by eons of crashing waves. The stones, monuments to the ancestors, taken away, shipped to distant horizons, to distant shores, to toil, to suffer, to shape foreign lands. The stones, memorials to the ancestors who leapt, who were thrown to watery graves. The stones not shipped, the stones remain. Memorial stones, millions, multitudes missing. The stones remain. Monuments, memorials, messages. And the last very short one, Slave River. Capture, Slave River, Asin Manso, sacred place, wailing walk, the last bath, cannot wash away Africa, cannot wash away Africanness. Auction cannot devalue human worth. Branding cannot create ownership. Chains cannot constrain strength. Fear cannot overpower faith. Horror cannot murder hope. Shackles cannot restrain resistance. March to Elmina cannot exhaust spirit. Dungeons cannot destroy dignity. Door of no return cannot sever forever. Middle passage cannot annihilate. Enslavement cannot conquer freedom.
Thank you very much, Timothy. Thank you. And so the last, in that segment, you were the last one in that segment, and the next segment is going to be led by Biko Macmillan. And Biko Macmillan is a young poet who has agreed to share the only person who share a personal poem of himself, and that he wrote, I'm sorry, and that he'll tell us a little bit about, he has 5 minutes to do that, to tell us a little bit about his style and what inspired him to write. And then you will introduce the other three people who come right in there after you.
Okay. So I'm going to move very quickly through this. So I'm Biko Macmillan. I'm born and raised in the Virgin Islands, St. Croix specifically, and I currently live in New York City, working at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center as a research technician. I'm going to move into my works. I have 2 books that I've published so far. One is called Writing on Roots. The other one is called Blue Period. Both available on Amazon and anywhere else you could get your ebooks from, and then physical copies are only available from Amazon. So the poem I want to read is one from my newer book, Blue Period. And this was shortly after I moved to New York City. I was in a laundromat, you'll see. And, you know, I live in Harlem, and I was really feeling the spirit at the time, and was really thinking about Langston Hughes specifically, and wanted to kind of, you know, match that energy. So I'll go into this poem. It's called Prince's Laundromat. On a Tuesday night, a young mother washes the soiled laundry from her young son. On a Tuesday night, a young mother washes the soiled laundry while her young son fidgets in the chair, earbuds keeping him company, like his mother's singing voice come bedtime. He knows not how she toils when the sun is up and keeps the home when the sun goes down. But he knows that his night clothes will smell of detergent and dryer sheets. They will be warm like his father's hugs he has yet to feel. Sitting across from the boy and his mother is a man counting the minutes until he moves his wet clothes to the dryer. He wonders if he has enough change. He does not do this often. Fabric softener in one hand, a pack of Marlboros in the other. He steps outside so the cigarette smoke may wander like his thoughts. It has been 5 months and he misses her. At 1:52 in St. Nicholas, the sound of silence and the fresh smell of a new week cut through the air. It is the feeling of home, whatever that may mean. So that was one of the first poems I've written since I've gotten to New York, back in 2018 or so. And one of the first poems I wrote for this new book, Blue Period. You said I have 5 minutes. How much more time I have left? About 3 minutes?
Yeah, you could tell us a little bit about what inspired you. You know, is any young people listening to you and want to write poetry, and in the same way that like 2 or 3 more minutes to do that, and then if there are any questions, we'll allow a question, and then we'll move to the next.
Okay, so for me, what started my poetry journey, I was usually more of like a logical, scientific mind, but at some point I got into this creative spirit, and what started out with my brother. He used to write poetry therapeutically, not for performance, but more so just to be able to express his emotions through a constructive manner. And, as a younger brother, anything your older brother do, you do. But I stuck with it, and I took it to a different level. And I used to binge watch Def Jam poetry, which is spoken word. And as a result, my background is mainly in spoken word. So the poem that I just wrote is actually far outside of my normal, what I usually try to write. But that's just what I do. And I just feel like it's one of those things you can do to express yourself, to get things out. My day-to-day job is science, is to be, very logical, very, just that scientific method. And with poetry, you're able to go outside of that. So that's just how I got to that. I just wanted to say that I'm really thankful to the Caribbean Writer for allowing me a platform, and also I'm always happy to help out every year. And I really do wish the Caribbean Writer well. It's a really great platform for emerging writers to gain a platform into the bigger world. So with that being said, I guess if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
I'd like to ask you, Buckell, can you tell me where you went to high school?
Yeah, so I am a public school child through and through. I attended Probie Larson Elementary School, Elena Christian Junior High School, and Complex High School on St. Croix. So, I'm public school all the way.
Okay. I just want to make.
Did you graduate from high school, Buckell?
What year? 2013.
Okay. All right. Any questions for Buckell? Okay, Buckell, we have some other people, 3 people that come after you. So you can, you know who they are, or would you like assistance with that?
Assistance. I have the names in front of me, but I don't have any bios if you intended to read those.
They'll be all right. Andre Bagu is the next person, and he'll introduce himself and do it.
Got it. Okay. So Andre Bagu.
Hi, everyone. Hi. So it's really wonderful to be here. And I'd just like to say thank you to all of the wonderful poets and writers who have presented work thus far. It really is a joy to be here with the Caribbean Writer to celebrate, 34 issues. And I agree, that's no small feat. And to also join with the world in interrogating the past as we try to reimagine or re-envision the future. So I'm going to read a poem that was actually published in the 30th anniversary edition of the magazine, and that was published in 2016, which turns out to have been a crucial turning point in history. The poem is called On Wordsworth's The Daffodils. In Trinidad, we don't have daffodils, he said, and it is wrong to write of foreign things. But it dawned on me, the poet's sadness, how only a man pensive and weary would prefer flowers to people, would retreat every now and then to remember that day on the hill when even the clouds were lonely. Isn't that the same country? And well, that poem, it first appeared in the Caribbean Writer, and I'll always be grateful for that. And it subsequently appeared in my book, Pitch Lake, which in its own way engages with or tries to complicate our sense of colonial history and its lingering presence. And perhaps, since that was very brief, I could talk a little bit about that theme and how it relates to my upcoming book, which is an essay collection called The Undiscovered Country, which is not named after the Star Trek. I know we have some Star Trek fans here among the panelists, but it's not named after the Star Trek movie. It's from Shakespeare. And The Undiscovered Country is really an essay collection that is about art and politics, and it's about reimagining the world and reimagining the possibilities and engaging with our colonial history. And so I thought I could perhaps just read a very short snippet from one of the essays, because these essays are all about art and my own personal engagement with art from all over the world, including Caribbean writers and other writers. A lot of it examines how art has helped me come to terms with my world and the politics that are shaping me and the space within which I exist in Trinidad as a gay man. This is from an essay called In Plato's Cave. Years later, I found Morris at university, and the power of art, of this very specific film, to transform life became clear. In a way, the film's wide open beach, its two men holding hands while lying in the grass, its angelic voices singing Psalm 51, its pouring rain in the cold moonlit night, its dark, musty boathouse where, quietly, someone lay in wait, hopeful, all became more real than anything that had ever happened to me on the hot streets of Port of Spain. I seized upon Morris. I watched it repeatedly, obsessively. I used it as a cautionary tale or warning. I used it as a prayer. I hoped that, despite the dangers of intolerance around me, it could somehow change my world. In this way, it already has.
Very good. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing that.
Thank you.
Next up, we'll have Mary Rykov. Let me know if I'm pronouncing it incorrectly, but Mary Rykov is next.
Hola, me llamo María Elena Auerbach Rykov porque nací en San Juan, Puerto Rico, pero vivo en Toronto ahora. I'm so thrilled to be here. And I'm going to read, or not read for you, I'm going to perform for you my poem from Caribbean Writer 28 in 2014, Puerto Riqueña. Graduate school fieldwork found me at the Jacob Perlow Hospice of the Beth Israel Medical Center, where the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Mendel Menachem Schneerson, lies dying on a hospital unit, not the hospice unit, because the Moshiach doesn't die. Well-wishers block the entrance, children sing in the park, and the Moshiach mobile circles the hospital block, loudspeakers blaring. Inside, I know an easy rapport with many New York City patients because, like Epstein's Cotter, I am a proud Puerto Rican Jew. I am a Jewish spick, my girlish pride chastised by Don't say that. You can't say that. Don't ever let me hear you say that. Tasked to prepare a music therapy self-portrait for class, I improvise in binary rondo form, an improvisation, a conversation between my namesake Maria Elena's song. And a classic Hasidic nigun. I loo loo loo, I loo loo loo, looly 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 loo, looly 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 loo. So, what is a Puerto Rican Jew? My mother would tell you Puerto Rican Jews live in summer heat all 4 seasons. No lilacs, no apples. My father would tell you Puerto Rican Jews live in a paradise far from Gestapo selections. Some Puerto Rican Catholics will tell you they too are Jews, descended from Majorcan Chuetas forcibly Christianized in 1391, who in 1508 hitch an age of discovery ride, only needing to hide from the Inquisition again in the New World. I will tell you in luscious color how Yiddish and Spanish merge in the ear as lullaby, while the surf drones and the coqui sings through thick air warm like a blanket. I will tell you the connection for this Puerto Riqueña to Puerto Rico is like the Sabra to Israel, with bonds that won't let go. I am so thrilled to join you here from Toronto. The biggest thing that happened for me with the pandemic is I had to cancel my trip, which was most sad. So I'm thrilled to be with you today. In issue 34, I have a multi-essay book review coming up that discusses Gabriel Haslip Vieira's White Latino Privilege, and Ed Morales' Fantasy Island, and Clelia Rodriguez, Decolonizing Academia. I'm going to end, though, by reading for you also the poem that accompanies the essay in volume 34, which documents my observations of how I noticed Christian Said had changed between 2013 when I was there and last year. Christian Said, USVI, May 2019. Despite that stateside fixers fly in after Irma and Maria, rooftops still FEMA blue tarp broken 2 years on. Our Redex oil refinery sports new management, new name, same get-rich-quick tricks. More stateside fly-in crews exploit laid-back locals for fun and profit while density swells pre-existing social safety net cracks. Prices soar and taxis fleece naive tourists who learn how to haggle before they leave. And them hard-working boys beyond reproach let off hard playing steam unchecked. Plastic fast food litter, broken glass, butts and beer caps now adorn seaside, sea life, beaches, and roadside ditches. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nico, you have the next one. You have your list?
Yes, I do. Before I do that, do you mind if I take 15 seconds to answer this question really quickly? Yeah. So the question was, how do you balance science and poetry? I am also in STEM and have continued my love for writing. How do you reconcile the two? My really quick answer to that is that people often see it as right versus left brain when it comes to science versus creativity. But the scientific method itself calls for a lot of creativity when it comes to answering these questions because it requires you to look for things that haven't existed yet. So you have to be really creative in the way that you go about looking at the science that exists and looking into creating the answers that don't yet exist. So it's not a balancing act of two very different things. It's incorporating two similar things that people don't see as related often. That's my quick answer to that. Next up, we have Corinne Binnings.
Hi. The piece I'm going to be reading today is a hybrid piece. It's a lyric essay, and it was published in the 33rd volume. It's a reflection on my last name, and the historical data behind it comes from Dr. Erna Bradbur's research, and particularly her book, The People of My Jamaican Village, which happens to be my Jamaican village, and hers. It's prefaced by a sentence of my own, and it's titled, On Not Knowing. A name is the first thing a man owns in this world. I spelled your name with letters clipped from a newspaper. It was all that was left of you. One word, B-I-N-N-I-N-G, Binnings. A name found among others upon the brown pages of a ledger, sealed within its leather jacket. Records of property of Dr. William John Nielsen, son of John William Nielsen, Doctor of Surgery, owner of coffee lands in Woodside, St. Mary, Jamaica, 1,000 acres, returns for 1820. Your given name, among others, was all I knew of you. Brown, Edwards, Walker, Smith, Thomas, Binnings. Some children entered by name, color, place of birth, and name of female parent. But you, a single name. Meticulously, I glued my letter clippings onto the black-gray surface of a smooth river stone, as the summer school teacher instructed. It was my name too. I knew as much, but did not yet know that this name might not have been your first, not truly ours. I did not yet recognize that it came with your state of servitude, that this name, stitched onto my homemade school bag, drawn laboriously onto my notebooks, and coached early into my infant memory as my possession, legacy from my father's father's father, was not ours to begin with. Now, with new knowledge, I do not know what to make of this name. This entity that, like the scarlet letter, is me. But is it? Is it me if my father's 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 real name was not this name, but was the one he carried silently beneath it? For there must have been another name before he came to this island. And if he came to this island from another with this name, there could still have been the other name he would have had he not been taken. A silent name he carried because he himself did not know it or had forgotten its sound. Is the silent name mine then? Could it be that even in not knowing the name I do not know, I too carry it beneath the name I have been given? And what does that make me? Who does that make me? I do not know. And there is no comfort in not knowing. In not knowing, there are only questions and suppositions that spin their own tales, never satisfied with theorized answers. There's no satisfaction in not knowing, for it is only in knowing that one is certain that they need not look for more. Knowing is everything then. And though some say forget and move on,
It is not as easy as those words flow. What's in a name, they say. Apples by any other name would smell as sweet. Yes? No? Do all names smell sweet like rain on hot dirt? Feel like the soft silence of a mother's approving smile? Sound like the natal announcement of old midwives? Taste like mangoes, thick yellow honey juice? Do all names look like the first light of day that gives itself to you?
Okay.
I placed my river stone with its paper clippings of your given name on the monument we created for those we only know by given names. I placed it with other rocks with other names cut and pasted by other children who, like me, carry silent names beneath their given names. Like a trophy, I placed my rock against the sun-warmed surface, not realizing that rain would eventually wash the clippings from the rock, strip the given name away, leaving the stone as it was, holding within itself its own identity, everything it truly was, no longer hidden.
Okay, thank you very much. The next segment is actually the last segment, and I'm gonna say quite quickly that we have gone over our time, but I would like to ask the audience that's here to stay with us. I think in some sections we really became so immersed that we let the time slip away from us. And so we have some very other powerful poets coming up next and short story writers. And so I'd like to ask the audience to bear with us, and let's just finish out this section. And thank you, Biko, very much for moderating that section. You did a wonderful job. I'm going to ask Elaine Jacobs, who is going to lead this segment.
Okay. Yes, good afternoon. You know, this is such a rich and wonderful event. You know, while in pandemic lockdown, I watched on C-SPAN a similar event like this, and I fantasized about seeing such a thing here for us. So Alscess, I want to congratulate you for bringing this to us, and indeed for this reimagination of their Lit Fest. So in this segment, we have Brittany Gabidon. Please forgive me if I mispronounce your name. Joanne Hillhouse, Positive Nelson, and Raquel Wiggins. We begin with Brittany.
Good afternoon. Okay, so I'll be reading 2 poems that were published in volume 33. The first one is Birds Who Dare to Sing. And around this time, I was exploring the concept of transgenerational trauma. So this was written in that same vein. But yeah. Birds Who Dare to Sing. We watch our father harrow the hummingbird. I see the branches creak, crack, fall from high, but I only hear the hummingbird screeching, screeching as she watches her babies yolk before they can bleed. It is a morning bloated with sun, and I find myself softly whistling Sunday songs. He chuckles, calls me his little hummingbird, and I am afraid of my father. Okay, that's the first one. And the second is Giant Sleep Hair. And how to explain this? Basically, it deals with imposter syndrome. That's when you feel that you don't have the right to be in a space, that you have not earned the rights, whether it be because of insecurities or otherwise. And so but it's more in a context where that insecurity comes from outside pressures or the environment. So yeah, all of that, I guess, metaphorically placed into a nature environment, scenery. Okay, so giant sleep hair. As if the sun had squeezed his roundness into the wet valley, all hills stood asleep, and the giants within them. Yet I rose no higher, exhaled no fog, sprouted no green, nor bore fruits from the depths of me. Instead, I, river, was bent to rush past the feet of giants, was made to run, to run, to run from hills sleeping. I opened wide my mouth for their sons at their snoring beckon. And that concludes the second poem.
Thank you. At this point, we have an ad we want to play for 2 seconds, Elaine, because we've missed the spot before Adrian is cueing me to let me know that we have to do that. So let's just take a pause for that, and then we'll go right into your next speaker. I see she's waiting patiently there.
Davis salutes the 34th publication of the Caribbean Writer. Some 33 years ago, Professor Erica Smilowitz pitched the idea of St. Croix sponsoring the Canute A. Broadhurst Award for Short Story Writing. We thought it was an excellent idea at the time to foster and highlight fine literary works. Davis has happily done so ever since. We wish much continued success to editor Alscess Lewis Brown in publishing the Caribbean Writer. We are confident it will be yet another great literary keepsake. We send our hearty congratulations.
Back to you, Elaine.
Yeah. Our next presenter is Joanne Hillhouse. Is Joanne here?
Yes, here I am.
Okay. Hi, Joanne.
Hi. Okay, so I'm going to read today from volume 18 of the Caribbean Writer. It was my first time being published in the Caribbean Writer. And I'll read a small excerpt from a story called Rhythms, which is about the space a mother finds herself occupying between her husband and her teenage son, and how music proves to be a unifier between the two. The boy is moving sluggishly. What's your problem now, I wonder? I thought you loved playing pan. It is about the only thing they both still do. Though technically it isn't something they do together. Both play the bass, trading off between songs. Ash had taken it up years ago when he was still young enough to want to be like his father. I like to watch them play, though their styles are so different. Moses is all spare movements and skilled, easy reserve, while Ash is like a rubber band, bending this way and that, showing off his girlfriend and his boys. As he plays on High Street that night, once I've managed to drag him out after teasing him out of his sulk, I can't help but smile. He is a joy to watch. His antics more than compensating for the self-consciousness of most of the rest of the band, a band of older players who, like his father, have been playing together since they were about Ash's age. Moses comes to stand next to me, hands me a cold malt. I lean into him. He'll grow up soon, I say, don't worry. He only grunts, but I smile. There is pride in his eyes too. Soon they trade places on one of the classic tunes. Air on a G-string, I think, not Ash's speed. He stands a bit in the shadows with his arms encircling his girlfriend, decked as usual in a dress that embraces her body, her hair just as high as Moses said. He wasn't exaggerating there. The girl is overdone. Worry nips at me, but I shake it off, turning my attention back to Moses on the pan, composed, precise, spare movements. I smile. They're soon back in party mode. Latumba's Hitman, #1 Hitman, jamming on. Moses is still on the bass, turning this way and that in time with the faster rhythm. In his shadow, playing air pan, is Ash, his movements an echo of his father's. If Moses notices, how could he not with the boy alongside him? He doesn't react, face as serene as ever. Ash the clown in a loose-fitting rumpled top and baggy jeans, his big hair with some headband tied around it in a contrast to his father's pressed black jeans and tucked-in band shirt, perfectly trimmed hair. His elasticity, counterpoint to his father's measured movements, their hands keeping time, moving together. I want to cry and laugh at the same time, so do both. Maybe if I could lock them in this moment where the one seems at peace, the other immersed in joy, both in perfect harmony until adolescence passes. So that's from Rhythms in volume 18 of The Caribbean Writer. And I'd just like to share a poem that I wrote, that was published, in volume 27 of The Caribbean Writer, because it carries through the whole idea of pan as being central to our life and relationships. It's called An Ode to the Pan Man. This one is for the pan man, the beating his pan all night at the pan yard man, working overtime in the engine room and keeping the rhythm tight while the wiry bass man bend like a rubber band. This one is for the pan man, the beating his pan all night at the pan yard man. And the woman, can't forget the pan sistren, take them tick-ton tune, create a musical meal the people can feast pan. This one is for the pan man, the beating his pan all night at the pan yard man. The youth man strumming the guitar while the tenor carry a melody the people can ride pan, because nothing sweeter than the Antigua Benner rhythm. This one is for the pan man, the beating his pan all night at the pan yard man, because he's a kind of magician. An oil drum, a pair of sticks, produce music like this, music with symphonic range even the elite can hang on pan. This one is for the pan man, the beating his pan all night at the pan yard man. Then come a stage and tear him down with swagger and bounce for trounce all comers and proclaim himself champion. This one is for the pan man, the beating his pan all night at the pan yard man. He sicken them, make man cry, man. Musical licks as the notes so high, man. Then tumble down to rest in the heart of man, where drum, 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 a new rhythm. That's it.
Thank you. Okay, Elaine, you're muted. You're muted.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Joanne. Our next presenter is Positive Nelson. Is Positive here?
It doesn't appear.
Okay. How about Raquel Wiggins? Are you here, Raquel?
Okay, Raquel Wiggins isn't here either. So what we wanted to do is wrap up now. We would do two things. Elisa McKay is the cover artist. She did the illustration for volume 34, and we weren't able to bring her in the beginning, and she has some commentaries on the work that she did, and we wanted to show the cover and get Elisa in. I know she was here earlier, but I'm not sure if she is here. Elisa? She's not, I guess.
May I have the spelling for her first name? E-L-I-S-H-A.
Elisa McKay.
I don't think she's here.
No, okay, we'll start off tomorrow with her then. And so then we wanted to close at this time. Elaine, thank you so much for moderating that segment. And we want to ask Matthias to sort of lead us in a bit of a meditation here at the end. And thank you everyone for sticking with us and for being such exciting presenters. We had a wonderful time. And it seems to me that maybe we should go until 6 tomorrow evening, because it seems that we kind of tighten in areas where other people wanted to kind of finish out segments. So we're going to look at it some more tonight. The committee and I will look at it tonight, and we'll discuss that, and then we'll post it so that we can, if we're going to extend it for an hour, we'll do that. But it's 5:05, so we're not too far, we're not far behind. So Matthias, can you lead us in a meditation? And thank you so much, everyone, for coming. You made today a very special day. And we hope to see you tomorrow.
All right, shall we pray? Heavenly Father, we thank you for today. We thank you for the University of the Virgin Islands. We thank you, oh God, for the Caribbean writer, its leadership, the committee who put on the Lit Fest, God. We thank you for all the panelists and the participants, oh Father God. We ask, oh God, that you would just continue to bless and keep us, oh God. And in this time of a global pandemic, Lord, with social distancing and separation, we thank you for a platform where we could come together to share and encourage one another. And so as we go our separate ways, God, I pray for your blessing, but also your protection upon each and every one of us. Lead us back to this same platform tomorrow. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Thank you.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Well, you know, I'm available if anyone wants to text us or send us a message for something that they observe. Criticism is good. We always accept constructive criticism. We want to do better. We want to be better. And we think that this is a beginning for all of us. So anything we didn't do, we welcome any suggestions or recommendations. Thank you very much.
Alscess, would you consider sharing the program for tomorrow, just in case someone hasn't signed up, might be inspired to do so?
Okay, thank you very much for that. I appreciate that recommendation. Tomorrow is day 2, Sunday, July 19th. We start at 2, and we really don't have to do the first piece because we did some of that. We'll play, so that'll go quickly. And we wanted to start Tiffany, Yannick, and George's early because 3 o'clock is the graduation at the university and the college in Tortola, and he is the president of the college, and he has to preside over the graduation. So he's asked us to move his presentation up closer to 2 o'clock. So we're going to change the schedule a bit to put Richard George's and Tiffany Yannick earlier that day. And then we have Paul Keynes Douglas. Paul Keynes Douglas is actually the featured speaker for tomorrow. So he'll speak first, and then Richard will come in right after Paul Keynes Douglas. Then we have some other readings. The segment introduction is by Nicholas Drayton. We have Shani Isaac and Bidu Diokin Kat Maharaj. We have we have Alicia McKenzie. She was here today. I noticed she was here. She stayed with us most of the afternoon. We have a workshop that is just for children and adults. And Oyoka Love will be reading from her book. Charlene Abramson will read. And Denia Milner will read from a book and do a book on writing for, do a workshop on writing for children. And then we'll have some readings. Carol Henneman will moderate a section. And then we have the closing response. What we will probably do is we play pieces of today in sections where we were thin. So if there are any recommendations for something you'd like to see again, we welcome any suggestions.
I do have a suggestion. Can you consider maybe an open mic?
Well,
just something to consider. We can talk about it.
It's something to consider.
Yes. And others may just come with something, because most people are home, they can just reach into their computer or wherever and just grab something that they can read, where we may have those.
Yeah. We don't have the time for that, but that's a good idea. I think it's something that we could consider. But because of the way it's scheduled, sometimes the presentations are not as short as we imagined. And
that's true too, yes.
So I think add something as like open mic would encourage people to really keep going. So that in an environment where you can't really control. Yeah. But I think that's a good idea.
We may have to put some criteria in place for that. Yes.
Right. Yes. Anyway,
just a thought.
Are there any other recommend? Thank you for that.
I have Tim here.
Yes.
I saw there was a question, comment from B. Pete on Chagda's statement about Uriah Butler.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, quoting, it is ironic that he brought God in as the pilot of his movement.
Yes.
A movement to dismantle a system underwritten by the same Christianity. Would love to hear from Dr. Liverpool on this irony. I would like to hear it too.
Maybe we'll send him the question and see if he'll just come back just to answer that question.
Yeah.
I will challenge him. I don't know if we're pushing it. We got these people to just come and give us of their time.
Yes.
And we might be pushing it, but I'll try to push it.
Yeah, he can be pushed.
Yeah, he can. Thank you. I'll let you help me do that. Any other questions, recommendations?
I just wanted to say, for who may not have seen it, I posted tomorrow's schedule in the chat. So you could go and copy paste it if you want to.
Okay, wonderful. So tomorrow morning, first thing, at 2 o'clock, I'm saying Paul Keynes Douglas is going to be on at 2:15 or 2:10. And right after him, we have Richard Georges and Tiffany Yannick. That hour is covered by those two presentations.
Alscess, I don't know about your maths there, because if he has to go to the graduation at 3, then that's
it's virtual. I think it's virtual.
Oh, okay, okay.
So I think, I mean, I'm just imagining it's virtual. So well, you know, we're gonna look at it and make sure that my mathematics is not too ambitious, and we'll make sure we communicate with the with our audience and our attendees. But thank you so much, and thank you for coming, and it's really a great afternoon.
Okay.
Thanks, Alscess. Thanks all.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you to all, for people who came from all over.